Nice.
Oh yeah, I gotta share the link. See, I always do that.
Mhm.
And then we start the stream and we're not saying anything, and I gotta share the link everywhere because I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh yeah, I just closed my thing. I should
You just gotta close it.
search it too. I mean, share it too.
Breadtube reacts to slavery is the
Mhm.
concept here. Put that here. So I'll put it in Sean's. That's funny. Oh,
Nice.
remember that tweet? What was that tweet? If you remember. Oh, hold on. Somebody's tagging me. Hey, Alfie finally
Mhm.
admits it. Let's see what
Oh, freeze.
Freeze is saying here. What is he admitting?
Uh, Something about the
Oh,
percent.
the percentage amount. Okay, because he said, really, dude, 2259. Post on the link. He says, does that sound to 10 to 20% to you? He said, my bad. I misremembered. Yeah. Wow. That's one thing you got on him.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, but I wanted to post this in Sean's server. I did. And tweet it out too. There's. Dun, dun, dun. But yeah, there's a lot of funny stuff going on here. And it does lead to a thing that I've talked about recently in streams about how these people, how it's funny these people like stream constantly is kind of what it is.
Yeah.
They stream like 8 hours a day. It's basically their job, right? So, but like
Mhm.
how with some people the job is research, make like a documentary style video, edit that, put it out, and that's their 8 hours, and you put out like a 20-minute, 30-minute video. These people have 8 hours worth of content to fill every day. They're not editing, they're not researching, they're not doing these things. For those 8 hours, they're just talking off the top of their head and desperately searching for something to talk about. And everything is on the spot, right? It's not something
Yeah.
like somebody throws a topic and they watch the video and they respond to it on the spot. It's not like they get the topic and then they go, okay, I'm going to watch this video later. And then, I'm going to analyze everything they say, write it down, get my thoughts formulated, and then make a video
Mhm.
about it, right? So these guys basically have to do the same things every day.
Yeah.
They run out of shit. There's nothing to talk about every single day either. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm.
Devin has like a backlog of stuff he works on, right? And it's always a backlog of stuff, but it's not because he has something to talk about for 8 hours every single day. These are things he makes note of, like, I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna look into that, I'm gonna make a video on this, and then he has like a backlog of stuff.
Mhm.
But these guys don't do that. They just kind of have to react to things on the spot all the time, every day. Like a radio show, basically. You're
Yeah.
live every day. You have to constantly react on the spot.
Pretend they can predict like what the person's gonna say that they're listening to as well.
And
Instead of
you're
just
not always
listening.
fully thinking your thoughts out. You're gonna put out some bad arguments. On top of that, yeah, you're working from emotion. Like you see this all the time, where these people watch a video and he's 1350ing or something, right? They don't give an argument to what they're saying. They just use a catch-all phrase to end it because they don't have anything else. They don't have any deeper thoughts as to what to comment on it. What's up, Twisted Smile? Let me
Interesting.
pop out the shot.
Mhm.
Pop out the shot. All right. But as a thing, so the newest thing is Candace Owens has made a video for PragerU. Now, you guys probably all know I'm not a fan of Candace Owens. I'm not a fan of PragerU. In fact, if you follow my Twitter, you'll see that I call out PragerU constantly all the time. And I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure I've made videos in the past about PragerU as well, especially when it comes to their religious bullshit. But in the end, I'm not a fan of these people, so I'm not defending them saying like, oh yeah, these guys are great, you should listen to them. But what I'm saying is these people have like one, they just don't have anything to react to all the time, so they have to react to things like this that are a big nothing. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
you know what, we just were looking at, somebody was showing us an article about some book burnings that happened at one school in
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 Canada.
Canada, and people are making a big deal about it, right? And you read these articles from conservatives, from the conservative side, and you read how they have to kind of twist it or sensationalize it to make it feel like it's a big story or make it feel like it's important, but it really isn't. It's really totally a non-story, and you're really just giving it more attention, which is what it wanted. Like the only reason these people are burning books is because they want attention. Like if you didn't give them attention, totally ignored it, like nobody else would probably do it, because they'd be like, oh, that doesn't work to get your attention, right? But instead you just show the world that it does work to get your attention. It does work to get the people that you think are your enemies to react, and and be fucking exaggerated about it. That's exactly what they want, is what both sides do about it, like, and it's always like that, but that's what I'm saying. That's what these guys do, is they're taking non-stories and trying to twist them and find ways to tell you that this is a story, and that this is important, but it really isn't. Nothing that they're saying here is of any importance at all. And yeah, I'll show you now. We'll start with the Lance one. I'm gonna have to share it with you. Hold on. We got Lance. Oh, I guess I hate this coming up bullshit. I gotta skip that.
Yeah.
Coming. Oh no, actually, it is for this sake of like analyzing his video. It's actually good to watch it, because you get to see what he thinks, or I don't know. He probably pays somebody to edit this, but what the people who edit this video think is like the enticing part of the video that's gonna suck you into watching the rest of it, right? So that's the only reason they do this, right? All right, let me. Boop. All right.
Slavery, by any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries.
Oh my
But we
God.
hear almost nothing about that.
I mean, he's laughing.
Just like we hear nothing about how
He's laughing
Be
about
proud
that.
of yourselves,
No, see, well, this is the straw man. I like that he does that and it cuts it out of context. This isn't really what she's saying. In that clip, and we'll see it later, this whole thing is under the context of white people being under attack. So that she's not saying that slavery is exclusively practiced in non-white countries. She's not saying that so be proud to be white. She's saying that so don't blame white people exclusively for slavery. It's not even happening in any white nations right now. Almost every majority white nation has outlawed it. So there's no reason to blame white people. This whole thing, that's the thing. A lot of this happens like this, and you'll get this in debates as well. People will come in from the wrong perspective of the argument. Like they're kind of both thinking the argument's the same, but they're both seeing it from different perspectives. She's seeing it as, hey, stop badgering white people about this. They're not at fault for this, and they're not uniquely they don't uniquely herald this, like it isn't, white people aren't uniquely slave drivers or anything. The entire world is filled with a history of all humanity doing it, and white people were doing it along with every other race. It was a human thing, not a white thing. You know what I'm saying? Is that what they're saying? Is what she's saying. Yeah. Stop attacking white people. This isn't a white thing. This is a human thing. And Lance is taking it from a totally different perspective, saying, stop saying white people did this. White people ended it, and you should be proud of that. Like kind of a. He's seeing her on the attack when she's on the defense of an argument, right? The argument's being posed to her, and it's not a literal argument. She's doing like a speech, but the speech is a reaction to a certain argument, and that certain argument is on the offense. So her argument is on the defense. Now Lance is watching this thinking she's on the offense. You know what I'm saying? And he's playing defense, but it's wrong. She's not on the defense. I mean, she's not on the offense. She's on the defense, saying white people aren't exclusively to blame for this event. They're not exclusively to blame for slavery. When you talk about slavery, people automatically think white. That's wrong. It's on the defense.
Noble whites, all you noble whites.
She never says that. She never says that. So be proud that white people did this, or white people. We should think of white people as saviors because they ended slavery. She never says that.
Make you feel guilty. You fools!
White
Don't
people
feel
are better
guilty.
because
You're saviors, every one of you.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. That's not that because he's seeing that because he's seeing it as her being on the offense, like she's making definitive positive statements, when what she's doing is really making defensive statements. So when she's telling you, it's slavery is practiced in mostly non-white countries now. She's not telling you that for you to be proud of white people. She's doing that for you to stop blaming white people. You know what I'm saying? Like, stop attacking them. You don't have to praise them, but stop attacking them. You know, this is the
There
truth.
are billions
The arguments
of
you
white
have to
saviors
attack
around
them.
the world.
Yeah, see?
Come on, take up your mantles. Continue to salvation.
Slavery was universal.
But like, he just made that up. He's laughing at a joke he just made up that had nothing to do with what she said. You know?
What the
Good
fuck?
people in-
Yeah, it's even funny to the point of, look at the title of this video. PragerU makes horrifying video. Nothing about this is horrifying. When you
Yeah.
watch it, they're all just straight facts. Like, she doesn't make shit up. There might be some that you could do like a technicality or really semantics, but in the end, what she's saying is all generally true, and there's nothing even closely horrifying to anything she says.
All right, I've heard.
What's funny, they even talk about like my ancestors. They talk about Tainos in Dominican Republic and how the Caribs like ate them and shit and were cannibals and shit. And I don't remember if it's this one or in Vosh's, but in one of them they're like, oh, you know, this is what some of the bullshit stuff they make up about the natives. Like, no, that's 100% true. Like, what are you talking
nothing
about?
but horrifying
In some places in the Amazon, they still eat people. What are you talking about?
things
Like,
about the
of
latest
course there
PragerU.
was
It's
cannibalism.
called A
There's
Short
been cannibalism
History of
everywhere.
Slavery. We've been doing a lot of PragerU Kids, and
It's weird to, even in that, it's weird to think that cannibalism is exclusive to like certain groups. Like, every group had practiced cannibalism at some point. You know?
It's
Like,
important for us to break apart those arguments.
to be
in
like,
real
they're
time.
only saying that so
I'm
you
sure
think
some
they're
of you saw
savage.
recently
Like,
the newest
they were pretty
Shaun
savage.
video. Some people have seen it, some people haven't seen it. Shaun the Skull, he who does not measure the skulls, fortunately, had a really good video on PragerU.
Whoa, is he talking about
What?
what?
Wait a second. Can you go back?
Hold
'Cause I
on, he's
thought I
talking
heard
about
that last
Shaun
time.
here. Yeah, he's talking about Shaun. Hold on.
The newest Shaun video. Some people have seen it. Some
No,
people
wait, Shaun is a different guy, because there's a lefty called Shaun. And that's his little
Oh, is
YouTube
there?
channel, Shaun. Yeah, Shaun.
haven't seen
Oh.
it.
Maybe he's
Shaun
talking about him, but that guy doesn't talk about measuring skulls.
the skull. He who does not measure the skulls.
And neither does he who does
Unfortunately.
not.
I had a really good video on PragerU and
I
how
was gonna say, if he's trying to say that Shaun measures skulls, Shaun has never just said anything about that. That's never happened. Like, what is he
they're
talking about?
often conflicted between where they define what should and should not be freedoms. When it good to rebel against one.
Lucifer called out Devin's videos great. Also, I would like to put out that Devin has covered this as well. That's how I know about it and realized I'm slacking on my surf streams about this guy, because I was like, oh my god, usually I'm the one showing it to Devin and he, you know, we laugh about it, and he showed it to me this time. I was like, oh fuck, I need to catch up on my making fun of Lance shit. What was it? Oh, so he tweeted out, Lance retweeted, maybe I can find it. I got my shit right here. Let's see, let's find it. The surfs. Oops. I should have just done this. Where is it? He tweeted out that Devin made a video about him, right? And that Shaun retweeted it. I like how they just follow Shaun, and when Shaun retweets Devin stuff is when they make a comment. Like, remember that Rose Risk guy made a comment about me retweeting what Devin said, and Shaun retweeted me retweeting what Devin said, and he used it as a way to get to Shaun. Look, he retweeted this. That means he's for it. Like, what? Here it is.
Yeah, it was funny when you did it, but it was a problem when Shaun did it.
Oh, I gave it a like.
Trying to do something.
I didn't mean to retweet it. Maybe I did both. He said, yeah, because I retweeted it was saying canceled. Like, who canceled him? What? But look how he takes this. He doesn't understand the sarcasm here. Canadian native wants whites to know slavery bad. So he's saying he thinks Devin's criticizing him for saying slavery is bad in a way of saying that slavery is good, I guess, is what he thinks. Because then he retweets and says, damn, getting canceled for my hot take. Better break out the blood, quantum boys. I don't even know what that means. Break out the blood, quantum boys?
I've never heard that one
I
before.
have no idea what that means. Some weird incel-y, like, spurg shit. But he doesn't realize that the criticism is, yeah, no shit, slavery's bad. This is how little substance this person has. Like, you're a person of such little substance that you literally have to make like a how long is this video? A 20-minute video saying slavery bad when nobody is saying slavery good. You know what I mean? It's so comical that he felt the need. And it's funny because all these guys did that. Vosh did that. Roserus did that. It's funny that these lefties feel that there's a need to make a video saying that slavery's bad. Like, it's the most obvious statement you could possibly make, bro. Nobody needs to make a video saying slavery bad.
Government like the US of A who is forcing you to do
this video isn't even about the morality of whether slavery is good or bad, because PragerU is already under the basic concept that slavery bad. All they're doing here is saying it's not exclusive to white people. It's a human thing. Slavery was a human thing, not like a thing about, based on
so
race.
At that point, Dennis Prager
every race had slaves.
I think it's fine, to show a little civil disobedience, because I hearken, and he said this actually out loud, I'm basically like Rosa Parks. Because again, I'm showing civil disobedience because the law is not just.
That is ridiculous to say you like Rosa Parks.
I
don't disagree with him on that, but the reason he's saying
that's kind of the PragerU thing, except when it
Mac
applies to
PC.
that they often don't want to.
Doesn't matter.
Show. This one is called A Short History of Slavery.
Sean, we almost thought he was talking about you measuring brain skull shape. Yeah. I was about to be like, what? When has Sean ever brought up skull shape? But I think he's talking about a different Sean, I think.
Which is going to be interesting.
Because he doesn't call Sean,
he
calls him Actual Justice Works.
Because this one might have a lot of
or said
facts
AJW or something.
And graphs and figures. So let's see how we do. And I should have added that it's this one's Candace Owens.
This one's
now
Candace
for
Owens.
A brief history.
Now remember, I'm not a fan of Candace Owens. I think she's a shill and a grifter and shit like that. Like, I don't think she's real. I don't believe her. And PragerU's bullshit too, and I think they're a bunch of propaganda, and I call them the TYT of the right. But that doesn't mean they're always wrong. A broken clock is right twice a day. I remember back in the day we used to do this about Bill O'Reilly. And that was a phrase used with him, too. I didn't like Bill O'Reilly, and a lot of the shit he spoke was bullshit, but every once in a while, he was right, and you can't say no. Occasionally, he was 100% correct, and you can't deny it. And it's bullshit that just because you don't like somebody, you're going to say they're wrong about things, or, Yeah. This is what they do. This is actually, like, person like Lance, especially Lance, is super guilty of ad homing people, or doing a basic ad hom, where saying certain phrases to him disregards whatever you say. So if you bring up a topic and he says, oh, he's 1350ing, I know it doesn't sound like an ad hom because it's supposed to be like an insult or an attack on someone's character that throws away their argument, but it is kind of to him, because when he's saying you're 1350ing, what he's saying is, these racist white nationalist, race realist people bring up 1350. So that means you're one of these people. That means all your arguments are debunked, right? Like, that's what he's doing. Yeah. So when he calls you, like with Sean, he calls Sean a race realist. Sean's like, what are you talking about? And we're all like, what are you talking about? How is Sean a race realist? Like, we know what people are saying when they say race realist. If he trying to say that Sean think races are real, yeah, they kind of are. You know what I'm saying? We all know what we're saying when we talk about races. When I say a black person, everybody understands what I'm saying, right? When I say a white person, when I say I'm Hispanic, people understand what I'm saying. Like, they understand the distinction. Now, that's not how he calls Sean a race realist. When he calls him that, that's how, like, the internet people will call people and say, oh, that person's a race realist. What he's saying is, you're a white supremacist, all your arguments are useless. I don't need to, anything you say is useless. That's why they do the mask off. He's taking his mask off. Another one is dog whistle. Whenever they say dog whistle, what that means is, I can't attack your argument, so I'm going to attack you as a person who speaks out to Nazis, because when they say dog whistle, that's what that means. It's a secret Nazi code words. They're using Nazi code words. So every time they say one of your arguments is a dog whistle, what they're really doing is ad homing you as a Nazi, as a racist or something.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's a total ad hom. That's all it is. That's why, like, calling it an ad hom could be technically wrong because it's supposed to be an attack on your character, but that's literally what they're doing. They're attacking your character, by saying that you're using this phrase that these other people use. Therefore, you are connected with these other people, and those other people can never be right. And that's why I say a broken clock is right twice a day. When there's one of these arguments where they're like, what did they look this up from a Daily Stormer or something? I think he says it. I've never been on Daily Stormer, yet I'm sure at some point I probably make an argument similar to theirs in one of their points, because a broken clock is right twice a day. Like, there's even some things they say that's right, or if they're quoting a fact, it's a fact. You know what I'm saying? You can't say it's wrong just because it's them saying it, you know? The better thing to do, if you really think it's a dog whistle, is to defeat that argument so it can't be used as a dog whistle, right? Like, so if somebody's bringing up black on black crime and you think that's a dog whistle, defeat that dog whistle. You know what I'm saying? Defeat that argument, have a counter argument, beat that argument, and now it can't be used as a dog whistle either. But the point is, they don't have an argument for it. They can't beat that argument because it's just true. You know what I'm saying? So they have to create this other way around it, which is to say, to call you something and say, oh, you're using this talking point from this evil group, and that means you're part of this evil group, and we can't believe anything you say, you know? Now that argument just means you're an evil person, and that's it, you know?
Slavery. Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown.
Okay, so while I adjust the screen, because clearly I need every single pixel to be on place for this, I'd just like to remind everybody, can we please avoid the use of phrases such as the term Uncle Tom or anything like that? Because...
Meanwhile, Candace Owens herself says that she don't mind being called Uncle Tom. I think she says... I don't really know the story, but she says in the book the character Uncle Tom is actually a good person in the story. So she's like, I don't mind you guys calling me that. He was actually like the hero of the story.
You are saying some very offensive things, specifically if you are not black. So I would prefer if that's not in the chat. We'll avoid those for the use of this Candace Owens segment. You can simply say that she seems to be a ghoul, because she certainly is.
She seems to be a ghoul. Why is she a ghoul?
Why is she a
I
ghoul?
think that's more like
rude.
Yeah, that's more insulting than calling her an Uncle Tom. I think that's even more insulting. Like, you're calling this woman a ghoul? Why? Ghoul,
It existed
ghouls
before
night
then.
out.
It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact, when the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped
That's my peoples.
he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner. Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East.
He had nothing to say about that. Oh no, wait, he's gonna stop now.
I didn't know they were gonna do this. All right, so
I didn't know they were gonna tell the truth. So this is gonna be hard. Basically, is what he's saying. I didn't know they were just gonna straight tell the truth about the history of slavery. So now this is gonna be hard to twist this and make it seem like they're evil. So, but here we go.
it's a very common white nationalist talking point.
See, there it is. What did I say? There it is. Right off the bat, the first thing he does is basically ad hom her, right?
Fact that slavery existed outside of white people. You will see it time and time again. If you spend any time in the worst parts of the internet, if you ever have gone on Stormfront to see what exactly, or on
brings up Stormfront. Why? Oh, I said Daily Stormer before. Stormfront was what I was saying. I've never been on there. Has he? He's stating what's been said on Stormfront. Does he visit Stormfront? I never go on Stormfront. I have no interest.
Deep 4chan.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, but somehow he knows about it. Like, is somebody just telling you? Who's telling you about this? Like, do you have any white supremacists in your circles? Because I don't. Like,
but wherever you go on the internet, if you
how do
see
you know
a
what they're saying,
large
then?
gathering of white supremacists,
and even still, even if you do see large gatherings of white supremacists, white nationalists, which I don't even believe his definitions of what those are, but even if you did see that, that doesn't defeat the argument to say that. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't defeat the argument. The argument would still stand. Like, and on top of that, this isn't even an argument so far. This is just a telling of like things that happened in the past, which are all factually true. And he can't really argue on them. So now he's saying these facts, all these exact facts that actually did happen in real life and is the absolute truth, is also repeated by these people. So people who repeat these facts tend to be these kind of people. So that means, you know, what? Like, that they're evil, that she's evil. Don't listen to anything else she's about to say after this. It's basically what he's doing. He's setting up the groundwork for you to not believe anything she says after this, even though he's admitting that everything she's saying is true.
Often a very popular talking point that it was not only white people that have done slavery. And
that's a popular talking point for historians, because that is the truth. Like, what are you talking about? And it's a response to people trying to put all the blame of slavery on white people. That's the point. With a lot of these, you notice these guys try to say that this is a straw man argument, but the truth is it's a video to everyone. So it's not really a straw man argument. It's more like an argument to specific people. And if you think it's a straw man, it's probably not to you. You know what I'm saying? But for them to say that nobody makes the argument that slavery was exclusive to white people is not true, because I've seen it. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it on social media a lot.
No fucking...
Of course, those are probably idiots, and she's talking a low-hanging fruit. But, you know, like, that's what it is. The low-hanging fruit video.
Kidding? No shit.
Yes, I agree with that.
Everyone
no kidding,
knows.
no shit. Everyone knows, but then this is not to you. This is like basic kind of facts about slavery, right? It's a short history of slavery, and it's set up even like a child's school PowerPoint thing. You know, like it's meant to be real generic. It's meant to be low hanging fruit. This isn't meant to be like
but sure,
an intellectual's response to anything. Right?
Does that absolve you of everything? If you were
This is a point, Devin pointed this out in his video, and this is a point where I find funny, is he's already asking, does this absolve you? Who's to blame? What is there to absolve?
Yeah.
Right? You mean absolve modern day whites for things that their ancestors did? That some of their ancestors, not even all of their ancestors did, that just some of them did? Or all of us, our ancestors at some point had slaves?
Slave owner? Like, does the
what are you
slave
talking
owner
about?
suddenly get
Slavery
to say, like,
existed
well...
everywhere. That's the point, is does it absolve you? It's so weird that even he understands the argument against them, saying it's a straw man, and nobody says it, and yet he still says, so what? Does that absolve you? You know? What an idiot. He's basically admitting that he knows the argument.
There's many others. We're all doing it.
Actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white, by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery existed when the Roman
They
Empire
ain't got nothing to say about that.
controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave master model was just how the world operated in the great philosophy.
I didn't think they'd do that, because we've had Aristotle brought up before, courtesy of PragerU, and when they've done that in the past, we've kind of been like, well, I'm actually going to read you a bunch of Aristotle quotes, because it was kind of yikesy stuff, but they are bringing that up.
Yikesy stuff.
I don't know if in the right way, as in, like, you should reflect upon this as a sign of the times, and that this is something that was beginning...
No, that's exactly what it means. I think what he's saying is Aristotle was saying that it was a positive thing, but it doesn't matter if Aristotle was saying it was a positive or negative thing. The point is the way he wrote about it and described it within the culture that was happening at the moment would show that it was done with normalcy, that was a normal thing. To have a master and slave relationship was a normal thing. So if you look back into like feudal era, even without slavery, but if you look at feudal era, you know, countries and stuff and lands, people had hierarchies of class. You know, the lowest people were the peasants, the workers, right? Like the people who had to work and do all the fucking grimy work and shit. And then the higher up you go, there's a hierarchy of people who are way above you, you know. And then even in that sense, you kind of have that relationship where things are, some people are noble and above you, and other people are the pieces of shit who do the grunt work. You know, like that's just the way life is set up. That's the way humanity was set up at the time. To say that it wasn't is ridiculous. To say that it wasn't completely normal for there to be masters and slaves at the time of Aristotle is ridiculous. There definitely was, and it was for most of human history.
To other an entire group of people. Aristotle was one of the first ones to kind of bring into the idea and into philosophy.
You already said it right there. One of the first ones. That means at his time, it was normal. And he was one of the outliers who was saying, oh shit, this isn't good. You know, like maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
In general, the idea that
that still means it's totally normal for the
time. Not
time.
whether these people are preordained, but whether they, whether the master-slave dynamic is one that is created naturally within nature itself, or one that basically...
I mean, if you think about it, it kind of does. Most animals work in packs of hierarchies, like I said. So there'll be a leader, and then all the other ones are basically the slaves to that leader, right? When they don't listen to that leader, the pack jumps on
Always
that
would
person, you know. and punishes
Whips them
them
into
for it.
shape. Yeah.
Yeah, and punishes them for it. You think of like lions, how there can only be one leader to the pride. You know what I'm saying? And they all do what the leader. They all work for the leader. It's really the women who do the hunting, really, right? And the leader just comes in when there's enough trouble for him to like flex his muscle. You know, like. But besides that, he's mostly just lounging and chilling and waiting for them to bring him food and do the shit for him. You know, it's pretty natural for there to be a hierarchy in a community, right?
Existed during
With
the
animals.
time of the
Oh,
ancient
thanks, Lord
Egyptians
Frittuse.
5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved.
Dude, a third. That's fucking huge.
Yeah.
Like, a third of the entire ancient world was enslaved. To think that was in moneyless labor to someone else who was above them. You know?
I can't speak to that because I don't know.
Slavery was also used as to pay debts. Like if you had a huge debt to pay to someone, there was that. I think that's what indentured servitude is, right? Like if you have a huge debt to somebody, or you did something where, like, say somebody sues you and you don't have the money to pay, then you would be put into servitude of the person until your debt was paid. You know,
Yeah.
that's what indentured servitude is. But that's considered slavery to some as well. We don't, obviously we don't allow that either in the U.S. But I don't whether you want to consider that slavery or not is a different argument, right?
And enough about that history to even pretend that I understand what was happening between the Taino and the Kalinago people. I mean, coming from PragerU, I would say always take it with a grain of salt.
Almost triple
That's probably the
digits.
best advice I
Holy
can
shit.
say. But the overarching thesis at the start of this is basically slavery is not exclusive to any one race.
Shit, maybe I should stream sooner in the day usually. I usually stream later and we barely break double digits. Devin's telling me we're at triple digits.
Slavery is not exclusive to any one
Almost at
nation.
triple.
All right,
Not quite.
everyone's done slavery, so we're all absolved.
The second thing you need to know.
See, there he is again saying absolved, so we're all absolved. But she's not talking about absolving anyone of anything. That's nothing to do with what this video's about. The video's just saying that the blame's not exclusive to one group. Every group had slavery. This was normal in society. And if anything, when she brings up that white people were the ones who abolished it, she's not saying to praise them. She's just saying, it's even worse that you're blaming them when they've been the ones making a swift movement to try to eradicate it from the world, and has been for the last 200 years, But instead, you want to blame them for it. It's like they're the ones who've been spearheading this campaign to end it.
White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery.
Oh,
1830
shit. The white
Oh, no.
saviors.
See, saying it again, the white saviors. But that's because he thinks this video's on the offense, but this video's on the defense. She's not saying white saviors. She's saying you're wrong about white people. Like you keep saying this, but look, they're the ones who are spearheading this change.
Yes.
Britain was the first.
You don't have to
country
praise them,
in
but at
the
least acknowledge
world
that.
to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were quickly followed.
Devin said new nickname for Alf Macchio. What's funny is he's from New York, but Ralph Macchio's character from Karate Kid moves from New Jersey to California when he becomes a Karate Kid. But the beginning of the story is him living in New Jersey, and then I think his dad dies or something, so his mom moves them to California.
Followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the...
All of this is true. He's not. You see how he's just staring at it, but since he really has no rebuttal to this video, all he can do is try to create intentions and be like, "This is why the only reason they would bring this up is because she's saying." Praise white people. They're absolved of any sin. Like white people, they're noble and they're our saviors. Like that's not what she's saying.
In
Though.
the United States Constitution.
After
centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice. That includes.
So, everyone does slavery. Everyone's always done slavery.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what race they are.
Yes.
But it was the noble whites who came along and literally freed the slaves globally.
Not what she said, but she said they were the first ones to do it and led the world in it, which is something that happened. England was the first one to say, we're abolishing. Not only did they make that a codified law, an act that said there's no more slavery allowed in our country. But they also then took the extra step to say that you can't even transport slaves by boat or in our waters around us. You know what I'm saying? Like, even, and then things happen slow, you know, it doesn't happen right away. Even when England banned it within their borders, they didn't ban it for their commonwealths. So some islands that they had in, you know, other places like Canada and all that still had slavery. But then, you know, the next step was they would ban it from the water, so nobody could bring their boats and transport slaves around to England between any of their waters. And then they did their commonwealths, you know, and then they inspired the U.S. to do it. The U.S., Abraham Lincoln was inspired by England to start, you know, to say, like, we need to make one rule on this for the entire country, not just state by state like we have been. You know?
And have continued to
well, as well as with all of the other
is,
stuff that was going on politically,
you know,
at the time. There was a lot of shit going on.
to a new height.
Yeah, the South was breaking off already too.
My word.
The 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during...
Yeah, that's a funny point Sean brings up in the chat is that I even went into more detail than she did, but Candace downplays how much British did to end slavery. You're right. They did way more than that. Even I said more than she did.
Saying that this makes
but that's what shows you that this is just general history of slaves. She's not going into deep stuff. She's not doing this. This isn't a point of making like a deep intellectual argument, where she's just giving the basic facts that will enlighten you for when you hear someone on the internet, which you do on social media, say that white people are like exclusively to blame for slavery. Or I've heard people say white people have never been oppressed. I've heard people say white people don't know what it feels like to be slaved in their past, to have their ancestors be slaves, stuff like that. I've heard that many times.
People better than anyone else. Of course,
white people don't understand how it feels to be colonized people, which I think is hilarious, because, you know, you think of like Irish people, like Scottish people, Welsh, like most of Great Britain right now, like of the United Kingdom right now is like colonized people and shit.
Not.
Yeah.
What are
My
they talking
purpose
about?
here is to simply tell the truth, and the truth.
PragerU couldn't say those parts out loud. That would be... PragerU knows what to do, and PragerU knows what to do.
Is that human history is complicated.
Yeah, see what Sean said, that's another thing we didn't bring up. Britain's Navy would fight slavers off of the coast of Africa. Like, they would go out there to stop people from, you know, being slavers. They literally were trying to stop the world from having slavery.
Guiltless. Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous...
No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless. In addition to, only one race has actually enacted legislation to end this.
That's not what she said,
That's
though.
not,
It's not at all what she said. You saw how he completely strawmanned her. That's not at all what she said. She said they were the first to. She didn't say that they were the only ones to do it. Like, there's you know, there's Asian nations that don't have slavery, have abolished slavery.
Persian Empire, or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes
There's all types
of
of
North and
countries
South
everywhere.
America, or
Oof,
Here we go.
add that in. Well, all right. So
She said, how did that... Oh, I feel like he didn't even want that on his video, and it snuck through. You know what I'm saying? Because he was like, oh, well, how did that get in there? Look at his reaction on it.
North and South America, or
had to add that in. Well, all right. So
PragerU,
I guess it's going a little bit more mask off than normal.
More mask off than normal.
Oh
what
my
was the
God.
mask off? Hold on. What was the point she said? Hold on.
That's what to do when PragerU
Hold on.
knows what to do.
is that human history is complicated.
Yes.
No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless.
See, I don't agree with this. I think everybody's innocent. I don't believe in the regardless skin was guiltless. Of what? Nobody. Everybody's innocent of their ancestors' stuff, not filled with guilt.
We are never told.
But that's like the religious angle, because PragerU does have that religious angle. So they're like, they'll make fun of white guilt, but then they'll have that, you know, Christian guilt. You know,
the murderous
Yeah.
that's like ridiculous.
No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless. In addition to, only one race has actually enacted legislation to end this, and that was white people.
Persian Empire, or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America, or
had to add that in. Well, all right. So PragerU, I guess, is going a little bit more mask
Talking about
off.
cannibalism.
Yeah.
But what's mask off about? All of that is true. She didn't say anything that's wrong. I often talk about this because I have Incan ancestry, and I'm a person like, not like a super person who's gonna be like, I'm super proud to be Peruvian and stuff like that. But because it's part of my ancestry, I've read up on it and I became interested in it. So I like it too, and I like reading about how the Incans were and the history of all that stuff. And this is 100% true, like what she's saying. I often talk about how people talk about white people coming to the Western Hemisphere and, like, you know, killing off natives and, you know, colonizing and taking over. And it's like, that's exactly what the natives were doing before these guys came. The Incans actually, I think it was like 2 years before Pizarro showed up, they had just unified the empire. And the guy who was the king, the emperor, had just killed his brother and became the emperor and unified this huge piece of land, largest empire to have ever existed in the Western Hemisphere before the Europeans came. And it only lasted 2 years before the Spaniards came and started fucking with them. But the point is, the reason they got that big is because they were a tribe who kept attacking other tribes and colonizing them and enslaving them, and then, you know, and making them assimilate to the Incan culture and becoming one culture. And that's why it got that big, because they were doing the same thing the Spaniards did when they came, you know. If anything, that's karmic justice, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, you think you're this huge empire because you had like might makes right, basically? Well, guess what?
Yeah.
We're a bigger might, and then we make right, you know.
I mean, they've been doing that. How many years ago did Steven Crowder have his, like?
But it is kind of that bigotry of low expectation kind of thing, and it's like you blame the white people because you see them as being the advanced ones. They'll bitch at you for saying that these people were living savagely, right? That the natives were living savagely. They'll bitch at you for that. But then they'll say, well, the white Europeans that came were more advanced. They should have known better. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, well, then the other people were savage, right? Like, what are you talking about? It's a weird cognitive dissonance that happens with that. And it's like, you want to blame one people for the same thing the other people did, but you also don't want to accept that one people should know better than the other people. It's like,
It's Native American Day, Indigenous Day. One where he's like, God, they're all cannibals, filthy cannibals, every one of them.
She did not say they're all cannibals. She just said some of them were, which is true. Some of them were. Not all of them were, for sure, but some of them were. That in Peru, they still eat heart, but it's beef hearts. But they still eat heart in a barbecue. They barbecue it. They slice it up a certain way. They marinate it a certain way, and they barbecue it. That all comes from originally eating heart, like human heart, after sacrifices. You know, like, and that turned into, you know, sacrifice. Eventually, at some point, this, you know, after the Spaniards came, they stopped doing that, and that translated to beef hearts instead. You know,
Because then it adds a little less, like, severity to the concept of genocide. If you're like, basically, y'all came over here and you tried to enslave.
Y'all came over here. For one, that's not true. Not every group that came to the Western Hemisphere was looking to enslave people. Not always true. In the South America, you saw that more, but in North America, that wasn't true.
Of indigenous people.
Not to mention that indigenous people had slaves themselves and kept slaves, and they would get some of the white people from these colonies that would make, and they would come in and snatch up children or snatch up women and make them their slaves. You know,
those who could not be enslaved,
they would take them back to their camps and make them their slaves. You'd never see them again. They would get snatched out from the woods and shit. You know, like,
would beat, execute, rape, torture, stuff like that.
Yep, the indigenous people did all of those things too. So it's funny. He points out white people doing all these things, torturing and this and that. What did he think indigenous people did when they snatched people up? You know, like, he thought they treated them really nice, made them part of their family.
In most parts, starved.
Brought them home for dinner and married them and shit. Like, is that what they think that happened? I'll put a ring on it.
For the large part, millions and millions and millions of people died as a result of disease. Diseases that you brought over.
Well, disease, I like how he says you, like Candace Owens, as if she's the one who brought over disease.
Yeah.
Diseases that you brought over.
He's addressing all of this like she's responsible. Like,
and second off, in those days, they didn't really know what disease was and how diseases worked. They didn't have virology back then. They had no idea that they would come to the U.S. and smallpox would start fucking decimating these people. They had no idea.
They simply weren't immune to. And then if you add, well, it wasn't a panacea. Back then, things were kind of like, If anything, we've helped them. We've made their lives infinitely better.
That is kind of objectively true, but I mean,
Mhm.
this is kind of an ends justifies the mean kind of argument. Like, if you want an argument about this, you got to argue, like, what's worse, the end result or how you got to the end result, right? And you can have that argument, whatever. But he's just not even having that argument. Like, he's just straight saying, they're going to say that it was better for them. And, like, objectively, things are better in South America than they were 200 years ago.
We've improved it, you know? Who knows where they'd be now? They'd probably be completely gone had it not been for, again...
I mean, we know how some of them are because we have evidence of this. If you look at the Amazon, there are still tribes there that have barely been in contact with humanity. And those tribes are still living the same way. They have a few things they've probably advanced in, but they're still living the same way they were living when the Spaniards came, for the most part. They haven't built much. They haven't created large cities out in the middle of the Amazon or anything, or technologies. They haven't done any of that stuff.
The white saviors who came along and introduced so many wondrous things.
A lot of them still die from like exposure and natural things, like getting bit by snakes, poisonous snakes, or poisonous frogs and shit like that live in the Amazon.
Christian culture to them.
They got piranhas that eat your legs. They got these big ass fucking catfish things that live in the Amazon River, that you could just be walking in the river and next thing you know, one of your legs is gone. Like, it just swims by and snatches your leg right off you. I forgot what they're called, the parabaima or something like that, I forget. But they're these big, like, catfish type fish. They are a type of catfish, but they only exist in the Amazon. And they come in all types of different sizes. But certain size ones, like if you walk in the river and it's up to, like, say, your thighs or something like that deep in, like, you'll just feel something, and when you look, your leg's gone. Like, it just swims by so fast, and its teeth are so sharp that it just rips your leg right off. And there's a bunch of guys, there's a whole tribe out there that if you look at them, I saw a documentary on this, there's a whole tribe living by the Amazon, that you look at them, and it's like a third of them are missing a leg and shit, or like a foot or something, like a chunk of their leg or foot, like, you'll see them missing it. It's funny.
Under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese,
and yet they still haven't done to them, right? They haven't advanced past the point where they don't get their leg chopped off from this fish.
We're told that slavery is a white phenomenon, and like all persistent lies.
But we're not.
You're not, Lance, but there are people saying that.
Like, it's a Prager straw man every time.
I mean, honestly, this is something you call straw man, and in most other places, if you saw this, I would say it was a straw man. But the point is, I have seen people say this. Like I said, this is low-hanging fruit. It's not like PragerU's putting out hyper-intellectual content. Like they put out these really simplified... You even see it with the animations and the way they portray it, that it's like meant to be like a dumbed-down version of things. Like it's not meant to be hyper-intellectual. And he's taking it as if they're making this we're fighting against the system that says slavery is a white phenomenon. Not really. This is a response to like some shit they saw people say on social media, because you do see that, like the Black Hammer kind of people and the Tariq Nasheed and the Black Twitter kind of stuff. Like you see them say stuff like this, say that white people have never experienced this, or white people are the only ones who have done this. You do see them say that. And to say it's a straw man is ridiculous, because I think all of them know that they've seen people say this. What they really mean is no one of any real authority is saying this, as if this was a super hyper intellectual response.
Saying that slavery is exclusively.
I bet people from the Surf's audience would be the ones to say stuff like that too, or claim that only white people.
I do not doubt that some of them would say that for sure. I do not doubt it.
All right.
Yep.
So if they think that, that's probably the first time they're hearing that's not the case.
No, it's certainly not the case. If we've all seen it, they've all seen it. They follow all the same stuff.
Anything you should be looking at abolishing the very idea of race itself, because it keeps causing these problems you don't want to happen.
This lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media, I come across extraordinary depictions about how Africans lived.
Yeah, on social. This is exactly what she's telling you. She's saying this is on social media. She's not saying when I went to university, they taught us this in actual facts class 101 that like she didn't say none of that stuff, but she said it was in social media.
pharaohs
That
before
wasn't-
Europeans
Oh,
came and laid
no.
waste
Yeah,
to it.
Wakanda, we was kings. This is why he's saying, oh no, but what is she addressing here? She's addressing the we was kangs people, right? Which is internet social media people. She's not addressing intellectuals, That's the whole point of this video. They're not getting it, and they're trying to use this. The fact that they're intentionally arguing against the lowest hanging fruit, and they're using that instead of just saying, come on, PragerU, this is low-hanging fruit. Everybody knows this. They're trying to spin it in a different way to make it seem like there's some evil intention behind here, or it's a or it's a an intentional straw man or something.
Their
Oh,
paradise.
Yeah.
no, I see what's about
I
to happen.
wish
I see
any of
what's
this
about
were
to happen.
true, but it's not. It's a fantasy. The truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other black Africans, and in many cases, sold for items as trivial.
Oh yeah, that's true. I'm gonna say Sean makes a good point in the chat where he says Lance 100% does this. He just blamed whites for germs they didn't know existed and called it genocide. Yeah, you're right. 100%. And on top of that, I've heard him do that when talking about Canadian indigenous as well, when talking about genocide, when he wants to call it a genocide, and certainly the things he did in the past was genocide, and he mentions smallpox in that, and like the list of things he's saying, and it's like that, nobody knew about smallpox back then. They didn't know what the fuck. They thought it was a curse. They say bless you because they thought you were literally had bad spirits inside you that are making you sick and shit.
As gin and
This is a white nationalist talking point. I can't believe PragerU
Again,
is
that's another ad hom right there. There's a white nationalist talking point, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, does it? Like, that's not an
This is
argument to
something
say
you
that.
will find in the annals of white nationalism, where it's
And
always
he does
like,
that a lot. Instead of giving you an argument against something, he just points out what other people also make this argument, which is a weird thing to do. Like, okay, so,
like, you've been sold this lie that white people are evil, and apparently they went over to countries in Africa and they literally took black people and forced them into boats and stuff like that, when the truth is it was actually black people that sold slaves to white people who came over. And it's
but
like,
that's the point. See, he's taking this wrong, because the point of this was to say that white people weren't the ones exclusively enslaving black people, that black people enslaved themselves too. The point to say that they bought it from a black person, bought a slave from another black person, wasn't to say that white people never rounded them up. It was to say that black people themselves had slaves that they also sold, into the trade. Like,
okay,
it's something that everybody did.
Again, no one's disputing that. By virtue of you saying that out loud, do you think suddenly it's like, oh, well, we've absolved everyone?
There he goes again, saying absolved, as if someone's to blame. Who's to blame, Lance? Who's to blame?
Over the ideals of what? The North Atlantic slave trade? Suddenly it's okay? Because
nobody says it's okay. The argument is never that it's okay. Nobody made that argument. This is the part where I say Lance has nothing to say, to a point where he has to straw man her argument into saying, I'm saying all these things to prove that what white people did was okay. Like, that's not wasn't the argument ever in this.
I think this all goes back to the idea that people are supposed to feel guilty nowadays for things that happened in the past, or at least that's what conservatives think liberals or leftists want. Like,
it's what a lot of people want. If you're gonna say that that's not true, you're full of lies. You're full of lies.
CRT is, right? That every single person at
nobody
home...
remember this, guys. Nobody in the video, Candace Owens, she never brought up CRT at all.
You should all feel guilty, every single one of you, if you don't happen to be like indigenous.
She also didn't bring up that anybody needs to feel guilty, but she did bring up that nobody is free from guilt, is what she's saying. Everybody, every race.
You
has
should
a
feel
history
guilty
of
for
doing
slavery. You should, because you have the skin of your.
But remember, he's been refuting this idea. So he's saying nobody's saying the exact thing, but he's refuting the opposite of that. So he's practically saying it, right? Like, he's been refuting this whole time, saying that white people aren't absolved of things, right? Like, but then he's saying that nobody's saying that. Like,
forefathers, you have the ancestral nature of your
so
forefathers, or any of this weird ass shit. No, you should just be aware of the systems that are in place. How we have these hierarchies. That's all anyone's.
Who isn't aware of that? Who isn't aware of how the system is in place? Like, what are you talking about?
Ever trying to do. That's what sociology is trying to teach you. It's just like, can we reflect upon the way society acts, how we act to each other, how there are certain advantages, disadvantages, how there are things called privilege, even though all these words now sound...
But the perspective of those privileges come from different places. Like, people will say white people and black people are privileged, but that's not a privilege of race. That's a privilege of generational responsibility. Like, each generation is gaining wealth for their descendants. You know what I'm saying? If you don't do that, how can you blame another race for that? You know, like, say I have
Sorry.
like, that's okay. Say I have like 4 kids, right? And I don't make any money and I in fact leave them with debt. Is that the fault of them being Hispanic, or is that the fault of me not making any money for my children and leaving them in debt, right? Like, that, it's so weird to put that on that and be like, you know, it's, oh, you don't notice that there's these hierarchies of privilege because of race? And it's like, the perspective is wrong. You're blaming it on race. We're blaming it on behavior. We say that's not the fault of a race. That's a fault of each individual's behavior. You have kids and don't give them anything, you know. They have to do the same thing now. They're starting from zero then, you know, just like you did. You know, if you don't leave your kids anything, if you start from zero and leave your kids zero, then they're starting from zero. Nothing moves. But if I start from zero and I gain a bunch of wealth, pass that on to my kids, and my kids take that wealth and make even more wealth for their kids, you know, now we have generations of people, you know, who have worked their way up.
Like buzzwords, and they've lost all meaning. That was the whole point behind analyzing all this. It was never to be like every single person should now feel guilty for things they had no control over. None whatsoever. You were just born into this world, but now it's your fault that this happened.
White.
He's leaving out a big butt there.
I hit the wrong thing. That's literally what Christians do, that though. Sins of the father. He says nobody does that, but like, Christians do that, and so SJWs do that a lot. Like, they definitely do the sins of the father
They
thing a lot.
waited on the coast for their black partners to bring them black bodies. The stark reality is that our lives had very little value to our ancestors. Here's the third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700...
Now remember that this is the topic now, is if you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. So he's going to make arguments against things that don't go track with that.
This is so fucked up. This is... Even by PragerU standards.
Why is that fucked up? I don't get it. This is the part where he says horrifying, but it's like, what's horrifying? That they bring up that there's still slavery going on right now? Like, why is that?
Video is really, really fucked up.
That's so weird. What's fucked up about it, Lance? I wish he would explain that. Like, what?
I've watched a lot of PragerU.
I have too. I bust them just like you do, man. And I've put out so many tweets against PragerU, just like this guy does. But in this one, there's nothing wrong with this video that they're making. My only problem with the video is that it's towards low-hanging fruit. You know, like that.
So many PragerU videos by this point, so it takes quite a bit to shock me. And this one,
which I don't care if you want to do that. No, go for it.
1,000 slaves in Africa today, right now. That's the lowest estimate that
That's
I could
the
find.
lowest. Yeah,
Other
there's
sources
definitely
say there are
way
many
more
more.
than 700,000 in the whole
For
continent of
context,
Africa.
That's almost twice
For
as
sure.
many slaves as were ever brought to the United States. Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor. These are the conditions that currently exist within the same sub...
Does anything you've said justify the North Atlantic slave trade?
See, this is the problem again. Where is she trying to justify the North Atlantic slave trade? This is what I mean, that he's arguing something she's not arguing. She never argued to justify anything. Her point is that everyone's done this, right? And that you shouldn't blame white people exclusively for this. And if anybody tells you that white people have never suffered this or that they are exclusive to this, don't believe them. There are people saying that. There are people saying that white people created slavery.
Or everything that's like happened since.
There's people who literally say white people created race in order to create slavery. I've heard that. I've heard like videos of, I think it was like a black girl on YouTube on her channel saying that. Oh no, it was that same girl from that Black Hammer video. Remember that Black Hammer video Devin went over, where it was like the one like Latina girl and the gay black dude? Remember?
Oh yeah.
And she was Hawaiian or something like that. Remember? And she said that. She said races don't even exist. White people created races to create slavery or something like that. Like that's what she said. So I mean, this is like I said, but that is low-hanging fruit. That's what I'm saying. She's making this video for low-hanging fruit. That's the purpose of it.
Because it's very odd that you keep turning to these like facts. I mean, even the ones that I'll grant you that are facts, which is, yes, it is historically true
keep
that
using
slaves in
facts.
certain cases were sold by other individuals. It was the slave trade. Slaves were traded. Wealthier slave owners in African countries would sell them to white people who would then transport them over. And one of the reasons that they were importing a lot of black slaves as opposed to trying to use indigenous slaves was, again, disease. They were more resilient to a lot of the diseases that indigenous people were dying from in North America. This is all part of history.
Yeah, well, it's also a part of that these people were like the people who were bred for working hard and stuff like that. Like, they literally were... The lowest rung people were the people who were bred for their physical might, right? Like, those are the people who bred together. So they're, like, literally good at physically, genetically, like, evolutionarily bred to do work and shit.
Why
Those
do
were
you
the kinds
use,
of people
why, like,
that
why
they
do you
were
want to twist
selling.
this into something else where we're
Yeah,
like,
the people selling them were the fat cats, right? Like, the aristocrats who lived good and
okay.
had the slaves pick tons of food for them.
Okay. Well, we've been told a lie. We've been told everyone does slavery. Everyone does. So it's not like we're not supposed to feel guilty for any of this. You were never supposed to feel guilty. No.
So then what's the problem, then? So why are you arguing with this video then? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, he's been refuting things trying to refute things from this video. He's been trying to add intentions behind what they're saying. What's the problem then? Nothing in this video is wrong then. Just say that. Just say that everything's right, but I feel like they have this...
Oh, like, that's not even the point of CRT. It's not to make you feel guilty.
Like he said, that's not even the point of CRT. She never brought up CRT. He was the one that brought it up. And now he's arguing against this as if she made the argument that that's the point of CRT, to make you feel guilty. Like, she never made that point.
It's not all of this is not to be like guilt. Realize what has happened and feel guilt all day.
How weird is it to think that
No
she
one's
brought up
saying-
CRT?
she's not saying that either.
That's so weird. She's not even saying it.
Where the
That's fine.
transatlantic slave trade originated.
Yeah.
African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then. And no, they are not.
She just
being
busted him on what he said earlier about the transatlantic slave trade.
purchased
He didn't even
by any
address that.
country
He completely
back then.
ignored it. Look at his face.
In fact, slavery, by any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries.
Oh my
But we
god.
hear almost nothing
Yes, already laughs about
about
it.
that. Just like we hear nothing about how slaves
So be proud of yourselves.
But
you
that's not what she said. You see how he twists it to be like, this means, you know, you should be proud to be white. It's not saying that. I mean, you could be proud of that if you want. I wouldn't be against that. But it's weird to say that that's what she's saying when her response is on the defense. Like, she just said that before.
noble whites, all you noble whites, every single one of you, they were made to make you feel guilty. You fools, don't feel guilty.
Lance
Your savior-
is white as well.
Look how he's flipping out, though. You see how he's flipping out about her making a true statement, by the way. That statement isn't false, you know.
Is every
If
one
not,
of
he would be shouting, spurting out countries that have slavery right now that are mostly white countries, right?
you, there are billions of white saviors around the world. Come on, take up your mantles, continue to salvation.
Oh my
slavery
goodness.
was universal
What?
What
until
the
good
fuck?
people in Europe and America ended it 2 centuries ago.
Good
Why?
people.
Because our
Yeah,
so-called
they're good.
leaders
Is he saying that it wasn't good people that ended slavery? Like, were those bad people? Is ending slavery a bad thing? It doesn't make you a good person? Maybe they're bad in other instances, but ending slavery is such a good thing, you'd think it might counterbalance the bad things they do.
black and white, would profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable.
Right.
That is true. That's, like, objectively true. Like, we see that. It's marketed so heavily. Like, now that, like, well, we watch stuff on TV sometimes, and anything you see in commercials, it's mostly brown-skinned people now. Like, you know, it's mostly black people and sometimes people of color, and you barely see any white people anymore. It's like, it's showing
What
that
was the
it is a
point of the
profitable
North
thing
Atlantic slave trade?
to lean into the whole SJW, you know, race vulture kind of thing. It's very
Yeah,
profitable.
look at
Why were
look at some clothing brands now. Like they're not even doing just the body positivity thing, but also like really pushing like people of color at the front of their brands and stuff like that. Like that there's a reason for that, and he's laughing at it.
They doing all the things they were doing. Why? Why? Please tell me. Explain that part to me. If we're gonna talk about profit, if capitalism, a new
But
fighter.
she's not saying that you can't do that. She's just saying that that's she's just stating it as a fact, like, hey, this is profitable, like, so people are doing it. But she's not saying that like people in the past didn't do things for profit. Like, I don't understand why he thinks this is an argument.
As approach, like if that's what we're doing now, holy shit! Like, wait,
how is that an argument to this, Lance, at all?
How are they picking cotton in the south, doing textiles in the north?
Yeah, because it profited, of course.
What could be the purpose behind all of this? Why did it accrue an insane amount of wealth for a particular group of people?
Right, so if you said... So, this is the funny thing. Now, if we were having an argument, and I bet you any money, if Candace Owens was having an argument with Lance, and they were talking about slavery, and Lance made a point to say, well, slavery is nothing if not profitable, right? Candace Owens would just say, you're right. You know what I'm saying? She wouldn't do all this. Well, what about black victimhood? If that, you know, she wouldn't do all that. She would just be like, yeah, correct. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
The ever living fuck.
That is probably a big motivator for slavery, is because of the profit. You're probably right.
It elects politicians and funds racial grievance groups. And if Black Americans began to view themselves as partners in the American dream, if we embraced the patriotic spirit...
Now, this is the good message in this, is to say, hey, let's stop... Literally, she's saying, let's stop seeing ourselves as these separate racial groups and just embrace that we're all Americans, right? And all be Americans first, as opposed to being like racial groups first or whatever. That's basically what she's saying. Like, let's just embrace being Americans. We don't need to see each other as Black Americans or white Americans or Asian Americans. Just see yourselves as Americans.
Yeah.
Heritage. And the race hustlers would soon be out of business. And who
It's all
wants
about
that?
the race hustlers.
I'm Candace
Got it.
Owens, author of Blackout.
And then he says something sarcastic about that, as if he doesn't know they exist. He's been on TYT. TYT are one of the biggest group of race hustlers. TYT had employed Sean King at one point, one of the biggest race hustlers. Like, what are you talking about? You know this,
Prager
bro.
University.
Don't pretend you don't know this.
Got it. Too much money to be had. That is how I fund most of the show, is the race hustling. Anyways, to every
Meanwhile,
What?
he's totally
That
done
does not.
What is he talking about?
person in my audience who happens to be white, if you would like to absolve yourself of some of
Oh
your
my
white
God, then he
guilt,
makes a bad
again,
joke
we have a
here.
special.
You see, he does
can
exactly what
sub
she's
right
talking
now.
about.
Yeah, exactly what she's talking about. And then he does
25%
it.
to your white guilt for the day. You'll have to come back for another dose, of course, but that's just how things work. Please don't go to Black Hammer for absolving your
Oh my
white
God.
guilt. They're not going to offer
Let's
you
do
as good a
Rose
rates as I
now.
can. Okay, I can offer you.
His is funny too, but it's different. Oh wait, it's right here. Bait and switch. See, he does the same thing. He can't literally say these things are wrong. It's not the same thing. He uses a different tactic, but it's not to say these things are wrong. But he also goes towards having to put like an intention on it, like, oh, this is all true, but the reason she's saying this is, and and then he'll make up this whole thing of why she did something, even though she never said anything
that I want to learn
to that extent.
historically accurate information from, it's going to be PragerU.
And
Yeah,
now,
but this isn't going to be historically accurate. The presentation is sent to like kids. It's meant to be really simple information. It's not meant to be deep dive into anything.
for a brief
So it says a short history. When they say short, they're not saying the history of slavery is short. They're saying the history they're giving you is a brief, cut down short version of it.
history of slavery.
Thank you.
Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown. It existed before then.
Oh, okay. Well, I see what the video is going to be. There are.
He did the same. Didn't
Less than 30 seconds.
Lance do the same thing too? Right when they got to the spot, he paused it and said the same thing. Oh, I see what they're doing. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? What they're doing is responding to like a trend on social media, even though it's a stupid one. But it's-
Ironically, people in America that believe this.
honestly, these guys. See, I go after PragerU all the time, and I respond to them all the time because of their really like basic takes. But they don't realize it. I guess they don't look at it enough or refute it enough to realize that they purposely do these like really basic takes. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
That's how they work.
This is a fact.
And they respond to like not academic stuff so much as they do to like trends on social media and stuff. And they'll like if there's a new hashtag, you'll see PragerU will make a video about it and stuff.
Education.
Those are kind of the
movement that is
things they
probably going
cover.
to be the basis of this entire video. Obviously, slavery didn't start in the United States of America in 1619, slavery has been a staple of human history for a long fucking time. It's
Yeah,
been
so this
all over the
video's
world,
not
but
for you.
specifically, the reason why people
You're
talk
watching a
about the
video
US is
not
because the US also
being
has a
pointed
history of
at
it,
you
so it's
and
being talked
responding
about.
to it as
But
if
there are still some
this is
left-leaning
like
people.
this is like if I watched, let's say, Teletubbies, and then I critique it as a 40-something-year-old and not as a child, or how it would be portrayed to a child, and I critique it that way, you know, and I'm like, oh, like, who would laugh at this? This humor is not, not mature enough, like. Obviously, Teletubbies is marketed towards children. Adults are going to look at it and review it in a totally different way. And that's what he's doing. This is something marketed towards the low-hanging, like, social media trends and shit. And he's responding to it in, like, an academic sense,
People that unironically believe that America created slavery. To clarify, NA education, left-leaning people.
NA,
who
remember,
believe this.
remember we watched this last night and we were like, what is NA education? I was so confused what he was saying.
Yeah.
For like half this video, he kept saying NA education. And I'm like, what is he saying? NA education? What is NA education? I was like, what is that? I had no idea what he was saying.
Yeah.
Now, after a while, I realized when he's saying NA education, he's talking about North America. That's so confusing to us.
Oh my god.
Because
oh my god.
because nobody in North America says NA, right? Like none of us. I don't think I've ever referred to North America as NA before in my life. It's so confusing, and I was like, "What is he saying? What is he saying?" That's just like a language barrier kind of thing. Like unless you're native to a place, you don't realize that nobody in North America says NA.
If this is going to be the whole
But he
video,
knows
then
the things.
I definitely can agree. But
Yeah.
God.
Sneaking
That's like you're talking about Europe and you say EU all the time, and you just keep saying. Well, I guess you could say EU for European Union actually, but that's something else. But say you
That
say
makes
EUR
sense,
because
though.
I think the initials for Europe is usually EUR, right? So I imagine you call Europe EUR all the time.
suspicion.
It's so weird.
That's not going to be the entirety of the video. But yeah, I mean, you're right so far. Fat NA education moment there by some left-leaning people.
It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact,
But again,
when-
he's saying NA education as if this is a response to people who were educated in a certain way. This is just a response, like I said, to internet trends.
the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner. Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of
You
East.
say Lance had something to say about that. You notice this kid had nothing to say about that because all of that is true. He couldn't say anything about
Europe.
it.
Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved
It was
by
a totally
Muslims
different
in the
tactic,
9th
but
century
it's
and
funny.
later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery
That's a cool jacket, by the way. I just want to mention that it works well with the earrings.
Oh my god.
That's just to stop my video from getting claimed for displaying a long period.
You hear this guy? So he made a comment about her jacket and he thought it was nice and it matched her earrings and then laughed awkwardly and said, that's just to clear the copyright. I don't know if I believe him on that. Did he like make a statement that he actually believed and then felt embarrassed by that statement, you think? And then covered it up by saying that's for the copyright?
Or is it be just a
Because
fill
I
it
mean,
so that he
you
doesn't
could
get
stop
a
and
strike?
talk for the copyright. I do that, and I stop it every few seconds and say something. But it's not like I say random things. Like it's weird. Or I'll address the chat. Like literally, he could have just paused it and addressed the chat. He has a chat, right? Like if he wanted to stop it for copyright every once in a while, he could just stop it and address the chat. Like, it's that simple.
Interruption. So there you go. You got a compliment to your jacket, Candace, because I just didn't want to let the video go on.
existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day.
He has even less to say than Lance does. I'm actually surprised. I feel like when we watched it, I guess because we watched them I watched the Lance one when Devin was reviewing it, and then this one we watched with him separately. But I feel like it was the other way around. Now watching them back to back, I realized Lance had even more to say than this dude.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? Remember we watched something where he briefly made a comment criticizing Lance's like style of commenting on videos live and stuff. He's doing the thing, so like
Yeah.
what happened, man? He fell off.
Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historians...
So to be clear, the reason why, for some reason, people are like reluctant to admit this, which is really silly, is because some people, some conservatives will try to use the argument of...
Well, see, look, he can't address what she's saying, which is already a response to an argument. So he's got to come and make an argument for her. You know what I'm saying? Oh, this because some conservatives say. But is she some conservative? Is that what this video is saying?
Oh, well, slavery existed, you know, like before the United States of America. It's only been white people. So therefore, U.S. doesn't have to do any like particular thing because...
What? Who made that argument?
What?
And it wasn't only the U.S. that did it. That's kind of like the...
That's not... No, it's not the implication at all. In fact, this whole thing is about... Not even about nations, really. It's just about white people. She literally says that from the beginning. The beginning of this, she talks about white people did not invent slavery. That's what she starts with. It has nothing to do with the U.S.
Regardless of
That's what he does. I remember now. He strawmans this whole argument as if this was all about the U.S. And he keeps doing that.
The United States that did it, which it wasn't. And there's been plenty of examples historically of other nations and other, you know, peoples doing it as well. That's still a wholly relevant fact to how we should handle the questions of reparations or the approaching of systemic racism within the United States of America as a country. It is relevant when discussing the history of slavery, and it's important.
It is relevant when discussing what? The history of slavery, right? What's the name of this video, and what are we discussing? The short history of slavery? That's what we're discussing, right? And you're saying it's relevant for that. So what's the problem?
Have good and accurate historical basis to, you know, the claims, the information that you make in regards to the topic.
So what's the problem? You're giving them the exact reason why this video should exist, and you're saying that it should, that it's totally relevant.
This is wrong.
He literally just made an argument for why it's relevant that this video exists, and everything they're saying in it is formulated into this video.
But a lot of conservatives will use this talking point.
See, but then straw mans it as, but a lot of conservatives will use this, but that doesn't mean that they are, right? Like
deflect of
that kind of makes it a straw man, really.
The effects of slavery on the current contemporary, you know, like existence of the United States of America.
But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about white people. They're not talking about the United States.
Slavery existed all around the world, but like we're the only country that, you know, people still blame existing issues on slavery, which number one isn't true. And
nobody says we're the only country where people blame slavery on. Nobody says that. She's talking about a race, not a country, dumbass. Like, how did he mess that up already? Like, that's why I say they it's like they don't have any other content, so they have to try to make this content fit into what they need it to be, right?
Not necessarily an argument
because they don't have any other content.
Hey, like these people are just, you know,
and that's just the thing of having too much content and not enough substance to cover all that content. Like, maybe slow down if you can't do it. This is why I was telling him it's better to make an actual video. He wants to do this shit live, and then they cut it out into a clip and post it. But this is what happens, is that he's just working on the spot. Sometimes that comes out good, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it looks like this, where you have to stretch the content and change it in order to make it, you know, straw man them in order to turn it into something it's not.
Couldn't get over it all, and more like, hey, we didn't, as a country, as a society.
Is Sean in here?
Yeah.
He is, but
who invited him in here? Nobody in. Oh, okay. Can you see what's going on? Did you jump into the? Okay,
yeah, let me set up my mic. So.
All right. Well, I quit.
Sean should be the right mic.
Sean's taking over my show. I guess I'm done. No, it's fine. I'm just kidding.
By the way, they do this. They do say like slavery is this unique thing to the Americas. To pretend that doesn't exist.
That's what I'm saying, but I'm saying that they're acting as if this video is meant to be some like grand educational kind of thing. It's for like the social media kids. It's like TikTok kind of shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is addressing those like internet trends, and you do see it all the time on Twitter where people are like, white people have never experienced slavery and all this shit. Say it all the
Yeah,
time.
no, they're going after like a dumb argument.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's a dumb argument that gets made.
That's what I'm saying. The true critique to this video would to just be like, well, this is an argument to low-hanging fruit. That's basically it, which is fine. You can have your video to low-hanging fruit. Who cares? Sometimes those are really entertaining, but that's really the only critique to have of it.
Also, the Turks like denied the Armenian genocide. Like the idea that they're having conversations about paying Slavic people reparations is crazy.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, and then with this kid, he basically twist this to be that Candace Owens is really only doing this to like absolve North America of guilt of something. It's like she's not talking about the U.S. Like she's literally talking about white people. She's not just talking about one country. Talking about the race of white people. Mm-hmm.
Also, Lance kept calling it the North Atlantic slave trade.
Oh yeah, it's a transatlantic. Yeah, it goes both ways. Yeah, it's not just North Atlantic.
Do enough
across the Atlantic
in order to remediate the like the history.
She did that too right after he said that, and then he unpaused it and let the video play. She highlighted Africa and pointed and said, this is where the transatlantic slave trade started, and it pointed to like the center of like southern Africa. So funny.
All the negatives that came with it, and therefore there's carried over like things like generational trauma.
Generational trauma. I can't believe anyone would say that legitimately, like as a real thing. Generational trauma. What does that even mean? I've heard people say use the generational wealth argument. At least that's something solid you can grasp onto. Like, but generational trauma. How do you explain that? I don't even know how you can explain that at all.
Even the generational wealth is BS. We saw, like, we've seen ethnic groups come to the U.S.
For
lower points than Black Americans.
There's arguments to it, but I'm just saying at least it's something solid you can argue with. You know what I'm saying? But to say generational trauma, how do you even argue that? Like, what? Show me in any way you could show me what generational trauma is. Yeah, how does that work? It's some bullshit. I mean, like, my ancestors were enslaved and raped and almost genocided out of existence, but that doesn't I never suffered any generational trauma over it at all. Barely affected me at all in my life.
I gotta talk to you about the Irish potato famine and how I feel about it.
We'll cleanse our guilt and sadness over our past problems. Our ancestors
still affect modern Americans.
Which potatoes came from Peru, so it's almost our fault. So you could kind of blame me for that. Because if the Spaniards never came and brought potatoes to Ireland, Ireland would have never depended on potatoes, to eat.
Yeah,
they would have been dependent on something else. Yeah,
that bacteria killed our soil.
That's true. It's us Peruvians' fault, so you can blame us.
Okay, so that's
I'll take it.
Another aspect. Of it.
I'll take that blame.
A lot more recently than a lot of the examples that she's pulling for here. But yeah, this is just a bit of context into like what the relevance of this argument is. And
you see, he gave it and said that's the context of the relevance of this argument. But it's not. That's not why they're doing this. That's not what they're doing. This is again a problem where they feel like that there is an offense and a defense to conversations, right? And they feel like this is an offensive conversation, like they're telling you these things, but they're really responding to something with these things. They're not, they're not making an affirmative claim. They're making more of a defensive claim. It's not this. It's not that. It's not this.
Don't know history and the education moment. But then there are also conservatives who will use this correct historical information to draw really weird arguments and like presuppositions and like descriptive and prescriptive statements from it.
John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act.
So here is the little switcheroo that goes on, right? So they very correctly identify hey,
You can't say it's wrong.
It wasn't just white people, it wasn't just America that started slavery, it's existed.
Oh, he's trying to make it this way, yeah. But that's because this is a response to something, and he's taking it as if they're trying to twist something here, but they're not really.
Entirety of like modern history, or like just human history. And yeah, it's not all of it. We aren't only limited to talking about the transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trade wasn't the only.
You aren't only limited to that. She said from the beginning, white people, this is a response to. You see, like when you read a study or you read anything somebody writes that you read, paragraphs are set up a certain way, and the first sentence and the first paragraph is the topic, right? Like, so what you go by when you're watching the rest of this video are the beginnings of each like section. Basically, it starts off with the topic, and the topic here is white people didn't invent slavery. That's the topic we're talking about right now. So he's already taken it and he's moved the topic. He's not looking at it as that's the topic anymore.
Only instance of slavery occurring.
And this is why he's saying it's weird that they're just, they're so weird that they're making it like, white people are the ones who abolished slavery. And it's like, well, that's true, but that would be a response to someone saying white people invented slavery. And be like, well, in fact, like white people actually were the first ones to abolish it in a large way like this.
White people abolished the transatlantic slave trade, and there they will relegate it exclusively to the realm of the transatlantic slave trade when it comes to discussions of slavery. So
that's not what she said at all. And she's saying, and it's not a discussion of slavery, it's a response to the topic of white people invented slavery. Right?
He's totally wrong though. The British didn't just abolish the
transatlantic slavery.
No, yeah. They went around the world and abolished slavery. Like they almost bankrupted their country doing so.
Yeah.
Also, the white people weren't exclusively the the profiteers of the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah, black people.
Most of the slaves from Africa went to the Middle East in the Arab
slave trade. And the Arabs too. Yep.
And it was something like most of them stayed in Africa. Most of them that left Africa went to the Middle East, and then the least amount came to the Americas.
Which Brazil took even a larger portion of that than anyone else, right? I think in the Americas.
Oh, they have more slaves than us, and they kept it till the 1800s.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny North America gets blamed so much for it.
Want to be really broad.
Nobody brings up Brazil about it.
And the creation of slavery as a social phenomena, but then when it comes to like who or what group abolished it, that's when they narrow down and they're like, let's only talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and therefore it was white people who did it, which is
again.
But that's not, well, not only that, but she's being very specific. She is being specific about what she's talking about. She's saying they formally outlawed it as an act. She's not saying that there wasn't little smaller communities out there that did it end slavery for themselves, but the British did it for themselves and the waters around them and their commonwealths and other nations,
They went to the East African Protectorate where the Sultan of Zanzibar kept everybody as slaves, and they were like, enough of this nonsense, because they weren't doing their duties in stopping it. They forced treaties upon people that they encountered to have them end slavery.
Yep.
So the idea that they just abolished the transatlantic slave trade, it's totally wrong. Like, this guy couldn't be more inaccurate. During World War I, they refused to divert some of their ships from the coast of Africa because even during a world war, they were still concerned with fighting slavery.
Yeah, for sure. Not to mention that it inspired the U.S. to do the same and many other nations. Like, that's why when she says that they, Britain basically led the way to this, it's really true. They really did inspire many nations into this.
The British Empire is uniquely good on this issue.
On this issue, yeah. It's true. It's true. They did a lot for it, man.
Plenty of examples throughout the entire.
They spearheaded it.
Where all forms of different communities and countries and peoples of all different
But see, he breaks it down to there were all types of communities before this that abolished slavery and blah blah. Yeah, for themselves, but they didn't do it in any large way. We're talking about a major power doing it for not just themselves, but trying to make it a global thing. Yeah.
He's basically saying, here's part of the here's an example of some people that were kept as slaves that overthrew their slave masters. Checkmate. And that's comparable to the British.
With the Vosh one, I was going to go over the Vosh one, but that one's too long, so I probably won't. So we'll probably finish on this one. But in the Vosh one, he looks it up to see who abolished slavery, and it's a whole bunch of nobody really did it in the same way. It would just be for like Christians or or just for themselves and not for other groups of people. And it was, I think the first one was Athens even, which I'm like, yeah, those are white people. Like, what are you talking about? Oh my god.
Races and ethnicities, abolish slavery is within their given communities or.
Oh, Haitians were the first ones too, but I'm like, that's just for themselves. Like, it was in this tiny little island. Like, I think that was 1810 or something around there, 1812.
Yeah, they overthrew the French.
Yeah, they
in
overthrew
Haiti-
the
in
French
Haiti.
and
That's-
abolished slavery in their little nation. Like, there wasn't much else besides that. And it was just for themselves. I doubt that they had a law against enslaving white people.
And it's not something that was done first
or people of
by
any
white
other
people,
race.
however they'd like to say it. And also, I believe that it was Denmark, or either Denmark or the Netherlands, that in like 1815 or something also passed the Slavery Abolition Act. That was actually the first slavery abolition
That's not true.
act to
They
pass.
had like anti-slavery laws and stuff like that, but then it wasn't complete like this, like an abolition
relation to
act.
the transatlantic slave trade. So
I mean,
yeah,
something else
Denmark,
completely.
Norway in 1803. So even if
I bet this says something. Became the first country in Europe to ban the African slave trade, I think it is. But they didn't ban slavery. Weeks before Britain abolished the Atlantic slave trade, President Jefferson signed a law prohibiting the importation of slaves into a port. Yeah, that's different than what they're talking about. Britain passes abolition. Who banned slavery when? 1907, Britain passed the Abolition of Slave Trade Act outlawing. Yeah, I think it was Britain. I think Denmark did something similar in Norway, but not complete abolition.
The Brits kept doing it. Like, they were on a mission to abolish slavery the world over. There's like accounts of when they're denied ports and cities because they would the soldiers would start a riot if they saw people being sold, like, after the Brits abolished it. So even it was like a moral issue for them, even down to the soldiers.
And abolition's different than banning the slave trade. That's a totally different thing.
to specifically like the specific type or branch of slaves that they want to talk about here.
Even we have a date for abolition, and for a lot of it, we don't say that the other states of the North had abolished it, really. For some of it, we call it a soft abolishment. It was like you couldn't have no new slaves, but they would just slowly, as there were no more slaves, there just wouldn't be any more. You couldn't have any new ones. But that's not even a full abolition act. When we did, after the Civil Wars, when we did the full abolition act, and there was zero slaves,
Massachusetts straight up abolished it. Like, a bunch of
some
northern
did.
states abolished it, but
some did, but some were we wouldn't even call it abolishment, right? Because it would be or they would call it a soft abolishment because it would be over.
There were almost no slaves in the North anyway because
yeah.
they're not profitable. The only thing that made slavery profitable in the South was the cotton gin.
In New Jersey, when we banned slavery altogether for the entire nation, we had, I think, 3 slaves in New Jersey left, and that's all there was. And they were even slaves who the owners had told them they could go free if they want, and they didn't want to. They decided to stay with the family, and after their deaths were buried with the family as well, because they were just grew up with the family and loved the family, and they just stayed.
They even get that wrong and cite Britain instead of
But they were
Denmark.
the only slaves left over from before New Jersey said no more new slaves, right? So they were in their 70s, 70 something years old.
Denmark, Norway, which is also very silly. But
By that time.
this is the trick of the video, right?
I don't know why they're
perfectly willing to be broad and accurate when it comes to
Pause it?
the history of slavery.
He's like, they get that wrong. No, they didn't. The British uniquely went around the world to abolish slavery.
Yeah.
Like, that is what you call it. That's what they did. So the idea that oh, well, in this society they stopped owning slaves or whatever, that's the same thing as the British Empire banning it not only for them but in all their territories, which covered a third of the world's population, and then went around to make other people abolish it. Come on.
Yeah, that is unique to Britain.
Slavery, but when it comes to abolishment, bang, heavily railroaded into the transatlantic slave trade and into Britain and white societies in that regard. That's the trick of this video that I'm here to talk about.
Were quickly followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course,
he's mentioning
came
everyone
the
else, too.
13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. After centuries.
Do you remember that thing with Kanye when he said he wanted to abolish the 13th Amendment? Forrester known as Yi, was roasted this past weekend for his comments about
Yi, he
this
said.
represents a God in America becoming whole. We build factories here in America and create jobs. We will provide jobs for all who are free from prison as we abolish the 13th Amendment.
White men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice. That includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War. Now, am I saying that this makes white people
By the way, the
better than
Kanye
anyone
thing?
else?
So the Kanye thing comes from the left, where the left is like the 13th Amendment didn't abolish slavery; it actually legalized it. It's from that Ava DuVernay film, 13.
Yeah, 13, yeah. And that's what he tweeted that in reference to, right? That's true. I forgot about that. I totally forgot about 13 in general.
So like a bunch of the
course not.
lefties believe that,
My
by the way.
purpose here
Yeah. Yeah, they do.
is to simply
Vosh's argument about this video is that we still have slavery now. That's what his argument is, and that's the prison system and people working and shit. And that video multiple times throughout him responding to this video, he brings that up, that we still have
That's
slavery.
literally the 13th argument.
Yeah.
So like this guy's making fun of the 13th thing, and it's being promoted by one of the bigger lefty streamers.
Yeah, yeah, Vosh, who I'm sure he looks up to, has watched
tell the
many
truth.
times.
And the truth is that human history is complicated. No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless.
It's complicated when PragerU wants it to be complicated, and when they want to railroad you into one specific political belief, they will oversimplify.
Well, none of this has been. There's been zero political beliefs in this video so far. Like, what is he talking about? There's been zero political beliefs. It's all been tidbits of
A
facts.
short
kind of.
history.
I mean, Candace Owens is wrong because like I'm guiltless. You
Yeah,
guys
yeah,
are
yeah.
guiltless.
This part, I was saying that with the
Yeah.
Lance video, that I don't agree with this part. This is like the religious kind of part aspect of it, right? Where they're like, no
Now-
one is free from guilt. We all have to.
Now, if you say no
confess.
group, regardless of skin color, is guiltless, like historically that is true. But like,
Yeah, in an argument of them saying that white people should feel guilty for something, you would be like, well, then everyone should feel guilty for that because everyone has done this in their history, like. In that sake, it does make sense, but really, nobody's guilty of what their ancestors have done.
when a
Sins
third of the
father is nothing.
world at one point were enslaved, that means every single one of us has slave owner and slave in our DNA.
Exactly. Same for me and my ancestors. I have, the rapey and raper in my past, in my ancestry from Spaniards and Native Incans, on both sides, and then like Taino people and fucking white people and Spaniards. That
Except for
were
the
there.
Irish, they didn't do nothing.
The Irish didn't do nothing except be starved by Peruvians with potatoes.
And railroad the shit
That's how that happened.
out of you when it comes to the understanding of history. Prager often does this, right? They do a number of sort of like incorrect framing devices and specializations and railroading, and then at the end they will like call out and be like, oh, make this like large like platitude about like good information or whatever at the very end of it to I suppose kind of like disguise the fact that they're literally doing the thing that they're proclaiming other people are guilty of.
Yet
What?
today we are
He said a
never
whole
told-
bunch
When
of
did any of
nothing.
that happen?
He said a whole bunch of something that didn't happen. That's so weird.
Yeah.
So the reason they're responding to this video is because they're angry that it doesn't say white people bad.
Yeah.
And the video is about how dumb it is to say white people are
Oh,
bad.
yeah.
So they're like, oh, well, we're not saying that. But it's like responded to any other PragerU video. You didn't have to go to this
Go to
one.
this one. Yeah. And it's funny that they're all going to this one. It's like uniquely a video that they all want to respond to. It's really funny.
And it's perfect. Like Candace Owens, she's wearing all white.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
it's like it's what you call it. It's perfect bait for these idiots.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly. It is totally. And it's like there's not really much in it you can say is wrong, so they have to invent intentions and come up with reasons why you shouldn't agree with what she's saying even though it's right. It's a weird cognitive dissonance.
By the way, the Brits were so prominent in their abolition of slavery worldwide that slavers had to they redesigned their ships to go in like shallow coastal waters so the British Navy couldn't find them.
Yes, they could
Like
dodge them.
that's how crazy the fucking Brits were when they were going after it.
They were looking for them. And that's why you had so many pirates at the time, especially traveling between Britain and or Europe and the Caribbean, because
The
they had to
only thing
dodge.
that
They had to dodge
The only
British.
thing that the Brits wouldn't do is attack American or French vessels before what you call it. They abolished slavery. So slavers would sometimes fly the American flag
To
or the
trick
French
them.
flag
Yeah,
to prevent them from being boarded. But the British didn't care. They would come up and board any ship that they thought, because the Brits are like, we run the world.
Yeah, they were
Like,
the
we're the
police of
British
the world,
Empire.
right? Like how they say America is now. Like they were the ones. Sure. They dominated that area for a while.
The murderous Persian Empire, or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America, or the heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few.
Because when you're having discussions on U.S. politics,
But who's having the discussion on U.S. politics, though? Like, who had this discussion?
Who did that? Yeah,
He's
that's
the
not what
one
this
who made
brings
it
up.
about U.S. politics. She made it about white people. She said
Mhm.
what white people didn't exclusively create slavery, right? Like, white people didn't invent slavery was the starting topic of this. Not the U.S. didn't invent slavery. It was white people. that
slavery
invented
in like Mongolia is fucking irrelevant. I'm sorry, unless you're having an academic discussion on the prevalence and the history of slavery in Mongolia,
and the responses to blaming white people today for
Yeah.
slavery of the past. So then you would also blame Mongolians, right? That's why you could bring up Mongolians, because the concept.
The
is about
reason they
blame.
don't want to have this conversation is
Mhm.
because so many different people were enslaved and they have varying degrees of success.
Mhm.
And he wants to say, like, and the left in general, like, he's admitting that it's not just white people, not just America now.
Mhm.
But the left wants to say that the reason black people aren't succeeding today is because they were enslaved back in the day,
Mhm.
which is ridiculous. Caribbean black people
Yeah.
do amazing in the United States of America.
And they were also
They were brought
enslaved.
over on the same slave
Mhm.
trade.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's not about slavery. Like,
I got some of that in my history in DR too.
but
It's so true.
this guy's like one of those very, oh, there's a gap between black and white success, therefore
Mhm.
that's due to slavery and racism, because he can't ever assign guilt or fault to the people who are actually engaging with their own lives.
Right.
in the United States, like you're in like an American university, super relevant when you're discussing reparations and systemic
Right, but
racism
this is the short history of slavery, not the short history of slavery in the U.S.
in the United States of America.
Get over
It literally doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. Like it's so far detached. That's why conversations are specifically focused on the United States of America and the United States of America.
No,
history
it's
of
not.
slavery.
That's not
and
true.
That's not to say that Americans shouldn't be educated.
People blame things on race, and you don't even realize that, because people have said white people don't suffer oppression. White people have never suffered slavery. People say that.
Slavery all across the world. Once again, one of my principal political beliefs is to reduce the prevalence of NA education moments. But yeah, it's not actually trying to paint it out here.
NA, is that what he's saying, or any? See, I'm still lost on what he's saying there, man. What is he
Not
saying?
actually trying to paint it out here.
This
The
is
second
why you
thing,
say
which is sort of
something.
political beliefs.
This is why you say something once before you abbreviate.
Yeah. Yeah, so at least
so
people
then
know
people
what
can
the
follow
abbreviation
along.
is. But then he's saying it in a context that I'm like, did he just say that he wants to get rid of North American education? That's what he's saying? That's what he fights against?
Is to reduce the prevalence of NA education moments.
Yeah, to reduce the
Yeah,
prevalence of
NA.
NA educational moments, of North American educational moments. Is that what she's saying? He's saying?
But this isn't just a what you call it. This
Confused with
isn't
that.
just a North American thing.
No.
Like, we have immigrants from South and Central America that come
Yeah.
here and they start vomiting up regressive talking points. No
Yeah.
knowledge of how black people ended up in South and Central America
Yeah,
and
yeah.
in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it one of the reasons why we have so much to go on for American slavery is because there was actually a moral question in the United States of America. So you had people making writings for and against it during the time leading up to abolition. In the Islamic world, it was assumed so much to be the norm that nobody was arguing against it, so you
Mhm.
had no writings. In Africa, a lot of these places didn't even have a long history of written language, and it was so normal that there was no argument.
Yeah, that was
So,
no
like,
argument. Mm-hmm.
So, like, America gets like a bad rap because you have writings that are pro-slavery in America, but the only reason those writings existed is they were a response to abolitionists.
Mhm.
So people were making the argument here because it was always a moral dilemma here.
Right, where it's not even a moral dilemma in some countries, so they don't even have responses to it. because they just see it as normal thing, as like you breathe and shit. Like, why would you make an argument against breathing, right? Like, that's true. Makes sense.
But yeah, it's not as she's trying to paint it out here. The second thing, which is sort of like the implication here, which is like, oh, like, white people aren't better than, like other people. That's not what I'm trying to say. What you said. And that's sort of like implying that the progressive side of the argument is about like blaming like white people and just like elevating
100%.
Is it not about blaming white people? Because from what I hear, it's
100%.
always blaming white people. Who else is it blaming? Like, I haven't heard it blame anyone else.
Like, just generally, like, to no avail, like as individuals, for like the crime.
Oh, no, it's not as individuals, but you are white as an individual, and that means you are to blame then, right? But individually you're not, but your group is, and your group will
It's not as
like...
individuals, but don't talk back, because that's just your white privilege exercising this.
And
there's generational trauma that you're not you're ignoring, and white silence is violence. But we're not talking about individuals.
But it's funny because he says as an individual, we're not talking about individuals, but even as a group, white people are innocent today. You know what I'm saying? No white person, not one, has had a slave in the U.S. Like legally at least. So no one is
slavery,
included.
Yeah, there's probably some cringy fucking people that do that. But when it comes to like serious,
well, he admits there are people who do that. Then
political actors, it's not about, and there's no sense and there's no purpose, and it's incorrect to like shame.
So
and,
he
like,
can't
sin,
say it's a
like,
straw man.
currently
He just said people are there are
like
cringe
white people
say
for instance, slavery, because they weren't around. They're not the same people. The reason why race is still relevant to those discussions is not because you are seek to like make fun of or attack currently existing people within that race.
But they do that,
merely
don't
because
they?
you use it to understand the way that race played in the past and in the role of racism.
Everybody
and
understands that.
and the outcomes that I have today, and then how we solve those like outcomes that we don't want in
Yeah,
society today.
Yeah,
And that's
pause
where
it.
But that's the problem, is how we get those disparities. They think it's because of some generational trauma. Can you like what?
He's like, we need to solve these outcomes. No, we don't.
Yeah, and we don't need to solve those out. Exactly. As long as all the policies and rules apply to everyone equally, I don't see why we need to do those things. Like why? Like, I don't get it.
If black people as individuals or as a whole have a problem with their outcomes as individuals or as a whole, they need to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Like, there's no two comparable white ethnic groups that perform the same. Like, different Asian groups perform differently. Like, we all it's the idea that everybody would be equal absent discrimination there's no evidence for it. None is ever asked for, none is ever given.
And like, my parents came to this country with absolutely zero in their pockets. Like, they came with nothing. And they basically worked their way up to having something. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's saying that they became rich and famous and popular or whatever you think America is, but they made their life here. They made a decent life, working hard for it, but they made a decent life. And it just shows that everybody has the opportunity to do that. Maybe not everybody has the opportunity to be a CEO of a company, or not everybody has the opportunity to be a world famous musician or whatever, but everybody has the opportunity to work and lead and have a decent life.
You know that now that you brought that up, I was thinking about this Bill Maher thing, where he was talking about this article that was complaining about how Spotify allegedly democratized like music, yet 1% of the artists get 93% of the plays. It's like, those are the good artists.
Yeah, those are the good artists. Yeah, that's just kind of, that's where the thing is like, maybe that's not an even playing field, because that's not gonna be one, but where it is, you can. Like,
no, it is an even playing field. They let anybody who wants to.
And that's it.
Yeah, in that section, not in the
Gotcha.
pop stars or whatever. And they've discovered new musicians through this, like letting people upload their own content. But obviously, to say that's like saying that PewDiePie, just one guy, gets so many more views than all these other YouTubers with like 10 subscribers and shitty videos with no audio. It's like, obviously.
Yeah. And what's funny is he actually earned that. Like, YouTube was against him on that, right? Like, on him being the most popular YouTuber. Like, YouTube didn't like that it was him, and they even tried to, like, they've pulled things away from him, and they've tried to like take him out of algorithms and shit like that, and he's still
Google
dominates.
juiced up T-Series because there's like a war
Yeah,
between Facebook
right.
and Google
Right.
on what you call it, on like who's going to be the one to bring internet to India. So they thought, oh, if the number one YouTuber is an Indian thing, then we'll get more people to support it. So like Google 100%, and you can watch the Game Theory guy. He explains how they totally jacked up T-Series numbers.
Oh my god. I think I saw that actually. Now that you mentioned it, it was a while ago, but I think I did see that. I think I remember that. Ridiculous though. But yeah, the YouTube's been working against PewDiePie and he still dominates, you know, like so. What are you gonna do? That just shows the hard work and actually, or just being somebody who's appealing to people works, you know, in general. Things aren't equal in that sense, but everybody has the opportunity to be those things.
And to put things into context, but not to blame like current white people or whatever for it, which is another sort of like implication of what she's saying. She's sort of implying that that's what like the left-leaning side of the argument is trying to do here. But, yeah.
That's what they do.
Instead,
yeah, that's what they
we're
do.
told that slavery.
Let me just tell you what they do, not actually show you or give you any evidence. I'm just going to tell you what they do.
He's saying the left doesn't do that. They 100% do that.
Yeah.
100%.
Phenomenon. And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies.
Yeah.
Now this is true in the context of the transatlantic slave trade.
No, what? That's not true. That's not true. Even in the transatlantic slave trade, that's not true.
I wish I came in for the Lance thing, because Lance is like, I'm a native. The natives, because they weren't treated as citizens. They were considered semi-autonomous. They kept slavery for 3 years after the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
Like, they were buying and selling African slaves.
I would almost bet that happened in Canada in a sense, too. Like, when Canada probably got rid of slavery, they probably didn't do it for their natives, I bet.
Most of the Africans were sold in Africa or to the Middle East, and then third to anywhere in the Western Hemisphere.
I like if Lance says he's a native, that's hilarious, because look at him, right?
Yeah.
He's white as fuck.
He's
Even if
just
he's
mixed.
saying his dad is Chilean, the Chilean side is super like Spaniard and shit, and not native at all.
When it comes to the greatest power holders, obviously there was interplay between like white slaveholders and slave traders and like non-white people, non-white slave traders in like specific communities. But overwhelmingly, especially from the context of the United States of America, the role of like white supremacy is inextricable from the history of the transatlantic slave trade. But once again, the transatlantic slave trade.
Now, the transatlantic slave trade was not a white phenomenon.
Just slavery.
It was across multiple races.
The whole historically.
They're also totally wrong, even about the like white supremacy thing. Like, the ideology that we would commonly associate with white supremacy was developed in like the 1920s during the eugenics movement. And it was about white. What they categorized as white was called Nordic back then. And the Nordic race didn't include Eastern Europeans or Southern Europeans.
No, that's like the Hitler like Aryan stuff, right? Where it's like blue-eyed, blonde-haired people, not nobody with dark hair and nobody with brown eyes would be included in that.
Well, what was so funny about the Nordic stuff is that barely even mentioned in like the writings about how the Nordics are superior was the Africans. It was all about like these trashy Southern Europeans and these trashy Eastern Europeans that were like, animalistic and blah blah blah. Like, so that's like where we get that foundation.
I've seen propaganda against like Romanians and stuff like that. Like they would be like propaganda telling Romanians were like these weird creature and stuff. Like, it's crazy to see that kind of propaganda from back in the day, but you see this. It's nuts. So it's funny when people say that white people have never experienced oppression or colonialism and stuff. It's like, yeah, many have. I don't know what you're talking about.
Social media, I come across extraordinary
History's filled
depictions
with
about
that.
how
Why is it social? Okay.
Why is this social?
I guess. Yeah.
Now, he just got it though. He said, "Oh, this makes sense now, I guess." Because that's what I'm saying. This is what PragerU does. They respond to like trends and stuff like that, like social
Why
media
why
trends.
are why are they responding? Why is a social media thing responding to another social media thing? Oh wait, I'm doing that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And he doesn't realize that's exactly what he's doing.
I mean, they're fundamentally critiquing people who are uneducated on social media. And
Yes, yes, it's low hanging fruit, bro.
then like framing that as like the mainstream progressive.
They did
political
not frame it as that.
It did
Not at
not
all.
do
In fact,
that.
this is showing you right now that it's not being framed as that. As they're telling you on social media.
opinion on these given topics of like slavery or whatever, or like the steel man of the progressive opinions on these things. But yeah, you know, if we want to dunk
Oh my
on
God.
people having NA education moments on
NA
social media,
education
we can
moments.
do
He
that
said
kind
it
of silliness,
again.
but you know what you're doing here is you're
This is mind you, this is the same education you get in South America when it comes to this kind of stuff, slavery and all this.
extrapolating a
I
lot
was
that
thinking
you're
of
using
when he said NA, I thought he was saying like non-applicable. and then he said
Non-applicable.
like non-applicable education.
No, it's got to be North American education, right? This is what I figured last night that it was when we watched this. I was like, it's got to be North American, right? Like, I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like to me. And it seems like so off to us because we never say that, or we never say NA anything. You know?
that to carry your argument a lot further than it, you know, merits to be carried.
Africans lived like
Imagine going to Europe and someone asks you and you say, "Oh yeah, I'm from the NA." Like, who says that? Nobody would ever say that.
pharaohs before Europeans came. and
Wakanda
lived
forever.
to their paradise.
Wakanda
I
forever.
Yeah,
wish
Wakanda
any of this
forever.
were true,
Ibambe?
but it's
Which
not.
Wakanda also
fantasy.
created by a Jewish
The
guy.
truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other black Africans, and in many
Can
cases,
we talk about this? Pause it
sold
for a
for
second.
items as tribute.
This is gonna be
All
fun
right.
too.
So look at the African garb with the turban.
Mm-hmm.
And like the white southern slave owner, like he came from the plantation to Africa with like a net.
With a
What
net.
is
That's
that,
not a
butterfly
net.
net or a mirror?
That's not a net. That's a mirror.
A mirror.
That's
Yeah,
what she
if it were
says
a
that
net,
they
it would have
traded.
like
She says it in a bit. They traded booze and mirrors for like
Oh,
slaves and
yeah.
stuff. And you know, I forgot. I don't remember if it was Vosh or anybody who made an argument that these things, well, they're not expensive things. That just shows how much they thought. And it was like, no, those were rare items in Africa. They were trading rare items that would be valuable to them. It wasn't much to us. We're like, oh yeah, you want mirrors and booze? Yeah, here. You know, like, but they didn't have that in large quantities.
It's
Whoa.
like oh the buyer didn't see the value in
yeah,
the person. They were trading stuff. It's like no, the seller, like if you go to a store and you see something that you really want that you're gonna pay, like, you know, and you're gonna pay a bunch of money for, but then they tell you it's $1, like, you're not immoral for paying the $1.
Yeah. Yeah, that's weird, right? But it's also like the value is different between each person. So it's like if you go to a store and they tell you something's like $30, but then they're like, but hey, I really like your shirt, and you're like, oh, this, I got like 100 of these at home. You know, like, it doesn't mean much to you. But they're like, no, but I don't have any shirts at all. Can I have that shirt instead, and I'll sell you this? Like, okay, you know. And you're like, yeah, I'll just go home and grab another one of my shirts and put it
They're
on.
like,
It's not a big
we
deal.
want the gin, and he's like, really, the gin?
Gin?
I made that shit on the boat right here.
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?"
exactly. But they don't have it. They didn't even have mirrors. That's why they were trading for mirrors. They're like, whoa, this is awesome. Like, they had no concept of how to make them, and they didn't have them in large quantities.
Trivial as gin and mirrors.
They probably had natural mirrors,
Whites
like
didn't
rivers.
go into the interior and round up the natives. They waited on the coast for their black partners to bring them black bodies.
So once again, just because this is
They
true,
act like these were different times, but they act like these times were universal, like that just because these people had mirrors and gins, that means the whole world had it. That's not really how it works at all. There's things Asia had that no one else had. There's things Africa had no one else had.
which is
Everybody
exactly
had
what I
shit that
mentioned
nobody else
previously,
had.
right? That there is obviously interplay between black and white slaveholders. The fact that the transatlantic slave trade, especially from the American context, is absolutely linked to like white supremacy. Like,
He's
overall
trying
as
to
a
pause it.
Trying to link it to white.
He's
supremacy.
trying to narrow it down to the American context
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, he's the one
Remember,
doing
he's
it.
like,
Yeah.
nobody does this. Nobody just
Nobody
focuses on the American side.
Yeah.
So then she's like, blacks sold other blacks.
Mhm.
And he's like, well, here's the thing. If you move to North America, it was mostly whites being the slave owners. It's like, But here's the thing: if you look to black people being enslaved, they were mostly enslaved in Africa, even before they were.
Mm-hmm. And he was saying this relates to the transatlantic slave trade, which a lot of that was within Africa, traded within Africa, right? Like from one nation in Africa to another nation in Africa.
He doesn't want to talk about the Arab slave trade lasted thousands. Now
that one too.
Not interested.
And all the slavery going on the coasts of Africa with white people as well.
And
white people being enslaved as well.
Even then, like the idea of like you're basing it on like white supremacy or something. The reason you're doing that is because you need a reason to justify it, because people are arguing against it.
Yeah.
Because again, this was a moral conundrum in the West, especially post-Enlightenment. In the Arab slave trade, they're like, the Quran says, as long as I treat my slaves like this, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, there is no argument against it. The Quran says it's okay, then that means it's okay. That's it. You're not supposed to argue against the Quran.
Argument to people saying that all slave owners were always white all across the world during the Atlantic slave trade, and all slaves were always black. Well, I think for the transatlantic slave trade, that's probably more true than the
more
former
true
statement. But
nope,
no.
You shouldn't, like, make those types of statements. You just have like a nuanced opinion of stuff. But regardless of having a nuanced opinion, you can still have the correct opinion that it was very much rooted in white supremacy as a concept, especially from the.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because the black people trading other black people weren't doing it for white supremacy, right? Like they're the same race. They were just doing it because they were a lower class of people. Like,
here's where he gets it dead wrong. So they were bringing people to farm sugar in the Caribbean and like crops in the South. Now they tried using the natives, right? Because that's the strategy: is you grab people, you throw them into the thing, and then they do the work. This is what you do: you win the war, you conquer the people, you enslave the people. Everybody does this throughout all of human history. Now, what they found out, and this is because black people had European diseases and they had other diseases that were like that Europeans
and African had visited each other many times by that point already throughout history.
And well, the Africans had cattle. A lot of our diseases came from our animals, so they had all the same animals. What they found out is that they had stronger immune systems, so that's why they brought them to Latin America or to the Caribbean to farm sugar, because they had stronger immune systems
from the Europeans' diseases.
They were even stronger than the European immune system, so they wouldn't die. That's why they brought them. Then after the fact, they were like, oh, well, obviously, like, slave-master dynamic, they were like, we're superior, otherwise they would have enslaved us, and blah, blah, blah.
No, I mean, these people were sold in the first place. To their own people, they were seen as a lower-class group that was to be owned and sold, you know what I'm saying, as slaves. That's just who they are as an ethnic group, you know, within the African society.
But the whites, like the white supremacy, what he's calling the white supremacy, came after the fact.
Yeah, way after the fact.
Like the practicality of these people not getting sick when they're farming for sugar was what decided to have them go with African
driving
slave.
Factor.
If Chinese people didn't get sick, they would have grabbed Chinese people. If Slavic people didn't get sick, they would have grabbed Slavic people. Like, it just happened to be that the blacks weren't getting sick.
And when it comes to South America too, a lot of them were already acclimated to that tropicalness, you know what I'm saying, like being near the equator, to the climate and the heat of the Caribbean, which is near the equator, you know, and a lot of parts of South America where Brazil and Peru and Ecuador are and stuff, you know.
Well, somebody's talking about malaria in the chat. Yeah, malaria is the reason why whites didn't go into the interior. There's actually Dutch colonists that got totally wiped out by malaria because they didn't realize, because we always set up next to our water. Look at every one of our cities. Right next to water.
Right.
And usually what happened is when Europeans came to a place, they would have to kill the people or fight them or buy the territory near the water, because that's where everybody tends to set up. But when they go into the interior of Africa, they're like, oh, all these Africans are way away from the water. What's going on? Turns out malaria, mosquitoes, that's why they're away from the water. So the Africans were like looking at us and you dumbasses. And the Brits, and I say us even though I'm not Dutch at all, but they're looking at the Dutch like, you dumbasses, and they got sick from malaria.
Well, as you know from living in this area, we still have a lot of places named after Dutch stuff. So. I saw a lot of the boroughs in New York are named after Dutch stuff.
I mean,
Makes
New
sense.
Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Bronx.
I think the fact that we
Brooklyn is
call
still
them boroughs
Dutch.
is Dutch, right?
It might be. That would make sense. I know Bronx and Brooklyn are both Dutch names. Came from Dutch explorers or whatever. Settlers. Oh yeah, let's finish this.
At the end of the day, like, you know, what Prague is about and what they're supposed to be talking about and attacking ideas from.
But this is,
Stark
but it
reality
is.
our lives
Hold on. This
had very
pause. This is a total stretching of content. Like, there's really nothing here, and they're really struggling to make this be something they can have content about, right? But the funny thing is, afterwards, he still has people cut this out and post it on his site, you know, as like, this is content. When after this, I would have been like, damn, we didn't get to do much about that. There wasn't really much wrong there. Let me just let's put
very
something else
little
up.
value
So,
to our
somebody says
ancestors.
Harlem is Dutch. I didn't know that.
I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt that
You-
at all.
you don't-
That totally makes sense.
You know what's crazy about New York? Tell me
Mhm.
how when you write an address for New York,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in Queens, you have to write the neighborhood in the
Oh
address.
yeah. It's different for
Like-
each borough, right? Like some of them
Yeah.
isn't. Right? Some of them is NY.
If you're in Brooklyn, you have to write Kings County. Manhattan, you write New York, New York. Staten Island, I think Staten Island, you just write Staten Island.
You're right.
So, and then the Bronx is something different. It's like it's
That's
ridiculous.
weird, right? Weird.
Mhm.
How did that work out? I don't know.
And that as well. Now she's making it sound like the Africans made the colonizers buy slaves. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit.
Made them? What? She never made it sound that way. She's just saying that that's the way it occurred. Like people would buy
It's not
slaves.
worded in the most balanced way, so to say, whatsoever. There's definitely what you mentioned here. Obviously, like, they wouldn't be doing that if there wasn't a demand for it by.
Oh, so now he's blaming white people for the African sellers of slaves, right? So the Africans that sold their own people as slaves, he's saying the only reason they did that is because there was a demand for it. So if white people didn't want black slaves, other Africans wouldn't be selling them, which is bullshit because they sold a lot of them to the Arabs as well.
And they
And
wouldn't be
themselves.
holding on. They wouldn't be holding on to 80% of the African slaves.
Yeah, and 80% of us held there too.
They'd be
stayed
holding
there.
on to
White
85% of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Wealthy, like, slave traders and stuff like
See,
that.
wealthy
to
slave
sort of,
traders.
you know,
That's
create
why they
demand
were
and then,
selling.
you know,
And they wouldn't have been selling them unless there was a demand, which, you know, there wasn't a demand within their own countries.
manifest,
guess.
I suppose, large parts of that sector, or like at least exacerbated. So yeah, there's that as well. It's a good point, Ludic.
Here's the third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700,000 slaves in Africa today, right
Super
now.
lowball number.
That's
There's
the lowest
definitely way more
estimate
than
that.
that.
I could find. Other sources say there are many more. For context, that's almost twice as many slaves as were ever brought to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor. These are the conditions that currently exist within the same sub-Saharan region where the transatlantic slave trade originated.
Mm-hmm.
African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then.
Yeah,
and
nothing
no,
to say
they
about
are
that.
not being purchased by any
Mhm.
country of white men. In fact, slavery, by any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries.
Mm-mm.
But
What's
we
he
hear
gotta say
almost
about that?
nothing.
So there's a number of things on here, right? So number one, now they're perfectly willing to be broad and talk about like the entirety of the history of slavery, which is fine. But then previously, when they talk about the abolition of slavery, bang, railroad into the transatlantic slave trade, and
That's not how it works, but
that's it. I'll
Again,
leave it at that.
the British
this is-
didn't just
they
abolish
abolished
the
slavery, yeah.
transatlantic slave trade. He's totally wrong. I don't know
Yeah.
why he
he's
thinks
the one
that's-
specifying it and saying that they're specifying it, but he's the one.
Maybe it's my
generalizing.
NA education.
Yeah,
that I
and
know that.
education. Yeah. Oh my god, I'm trying to work against EUR education.
This is true when it comes to slavery in Africa, and it's not a good thing. Believe it or not, I'm going to come out with the brave anti-slavery stance here. But
doing
yeah,
it.
then there's also the question.
The blame slavery stance. Somebody in the chat brought up Mexico has sex slaves, and I'm like, yeah, that's a good point too. People get kidnapped on vacation in Mexico and get sold into slavery. Totally happens a lot.
Question of like what's a white country and what's like a non-white
What's
country.
a white country and what's a non-white country? You really need that
Majority white
explained to
is a
you?
white-
Like, how is that? He lives in a white country, so like, he
Are you just
should
going
know.
by like majority demographics, or are you going about historical thing, or are you going about stuff
Historical
like that,
thing.
which is kind of weird. Unironically, probably would have preferred it if they just said like Western country.
Yeah, but then if they said Western country, you might be able to bust them because not every Western country is white, right?
Here, but also that's,
Mostly.
you know, it's, yeah, of course, like legally it's not practiced in like, you know, white countries or Western countries, but there does occur like human trafficking and example,
Yeah,
like,
obviously, bro.
Yeah, we have to
like,
call
in
that
those
something
countries.
different.
Yeah.
Ironically, we call that white slavery.
White slavery. Yeah.
even though they're not legalized. So I understand the broad point she's making here, but these this like sort of like very
Yeah.
reductive.
Whites, the slavery that whites practice uniquely is the kind of slavery that you have to do illegally because none of their countries allow it.
Reductionist statement, which is this entire video basically.
No
that
other
slavery is
racial
exclusively
group has
practiced
to do
today
that exclusively.
within non-white countries. Number one is very
You're
confusing
ridiculous.
what they mean by like non-white or white countries. Number two isn't true. Like some clauses here in relation to the legalities probably a lot more relevant because it does occur in other countries, although to way lesser extents than the specific example you're talking about in like.
Oh my God, it's not that deep of a fucking statement, bro, for you to go that far.
Here in Africa as well, but
it's crazy
how
much he has to go through to
generally
try to make
dramatic
it seem.
oversimplifications when it's beneficial to them, and being very nuanced and comprehensive when it's beneficial to them, and they sort of like jump between the two depending on what fits their narrative the best.
About that. Just like we hear nothing about how slavery was.
I mean, it's obvious that country was part of that sentence. So she means countries, a country that does it, where the entire country doesn't practice it. As in, she doesn't mean every individual. She means like it's against the rules of that country. They don't see it.
We have to pretend that we have to pretend that in what's like Qatar, the employer, when you become a migrant worker, doesn't own your passport and determine whether or not you can leave the country. It's not a legal institution in Qatar.
Yeah,
like we have to
exactly.
pretend that doesn't exist.
Exactly. It's not. Yeah, where there's countries now where you can legally have slaves. That's what she's saying.
Universal until good
And it's a
people in
normal
Europe and
practice of
America
that
ended it
country.
2 centuries ago. Why? Because our so-called leaders, black and white, wouldn't profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable. It elects politicians
true.
and funds racial grievance groups. And if black Americans began to view themselves
He
as
made a face,
partners
but he
in the
couldn't say
American
anything
dream,
about it. Like he doesn't know.
if we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all
And
men
here's the
are
good
created
message.
equal,
This is where they're gonna have a
patriotic
problem.
spirit that is our real heritage, and the race hustlers would soon be out of business. And who wants that? I'm Candace Owens, author of Blackout for Prager University.
And once again, this is the thing I talked about at the very beginning of the video. This was going to be the implication, right? That just because, hey, like
what's he stretching this to?
historically, slavery has been widespread and has affected all types of different societies. Now, here in the end, they're using it to prove, or like to kind of imply that black people aren't really disadvantaged, and that hey, they need to like get over it and just embrace the patriarchy.
I mean, get over it. Yeah. I mean, she's even not saying that they aren't disadvantaged at any point. She hasn't said that. Really, what she's saying is, even if you are disadvantaged, don't play the victim. That's the part of this. Black victimhood is profitable. The more you sink into victimhood, the more people are going to encourage you to do it because it's profitable. But stop being a victim. Don't play the victim and excel.
hey,
you know what I'm saying? Be
basically,
American
like,
and
get
excel.
over it
You know?
and just embrace the patriotic
Embrace
spirit
being
and,
American and
hey,
all of us
men
being
were
one
created
people
equal,
and
there wasn't,
work towards what you want because you're
there
free to.
wasn't slavery, there wasn't Jim Crow, there wasn't all of these things that dramatically fucked over black Americans.
Yeah, she didn't say any of that. She's just saying the get over it part. Yeah, she's not saying there wasn't things that fucked over black Americans in the past. She's just saying get over it, move on.
That's kind of this like skedaddled over, I guess. There,
people come here who are less advantaged and do good, and work hard and do good. That's an
under the
example that
guise
you
of,
can do
well,
it. Yeah.
Slavery happened globally, and historically
Yeah,
in all
it
types
did.
of societies. And even though that's true, that's not a counter-argument, or that doesn't in any way delegitimize an argument stating that slavery and second-class citizenship and Jim Crow and the rest
It does.
Yeah, it does.
of it was a very heavily white supremacist phenomena in the United States of America, and undebatably so. And
Yeah, I don't know about that.
that
And all those things were all separate things for different reasons.
is what they're sort of like implying isn't real here in these.
We didn't even create the United States. Didn't even create slavery for itself. We inherited it from
Yeah.
our forebears, from before America even existed, from before Americans was even a concept, that they already had slaves here. We inherited that. We inherited the practice. We didn't even create the practice for ourselves, in the U.S.
And even in our original, in not the original United States Constitution, they were like, yeah, we're gonna, what you call it, this is only gonna last for this amount of time. Like, they banned the import of new slaves in the Constitution.
That's what I was saying. In the North, that's what we did first. A lot of the states did first. Some of them abolished it right away, but some of them just abolished no new slaves. And we now what they call the soft abolition, and eventually those
they wanted to phase it out.
would phase out. Yeah, we would do a phase out method until the whole nation did it, right? Like I said, that had been going on for so long that, like I said about New Jersey, by the point we did it nationwide, there was only like 3 slaves left, and those were slaves who wanted to stay with them, with their families. And even after it was abolished completely, they still stayed with those families, and it was buried with them. All right, so yeah, that was pretty funny. Vosh also, when I was gonna go over the Vosh one too, but that one's like 50 minutes or something. We've already streamed for a while, and I'm already tired. So So we'll end it here. Thanks for watching, guys. That was fun. These guys are idiots. It's funny to watch them all react in kind of the same way, but kind of different way for the same video. It's weird. Like Vosh's is even funny too, and he kind of does the same thing too, where he goes for intent and he tries to fact check everything she says and fails for most of it, and maybe finds these little semantic things that aren't really a response, but it's funny. But all right.
Always the non-American guys do that.
Who? What?
The non-American people. They always do that.
Except Vosh, she's the only American one. But we watched a Swedish guy and a Canadian guy talk about American slavery. Or world slavery, really.